The crumpled $100 bill hit my cheek with a soft flick before fluttering onto the blood-soaked sheets. It was 2:30 in the morning. A blinding Michigan snowstorm was rattling the bedroom windows, and my water had just broken 6 weeks early. My husband of 4 years did not reach for his phone to call for help. He did not ask if I was okay. Instead, he pulled a single bill from his leather wallet, tossed it at my face, and muttered, "Take an Uber. I need my sleep." What he did not know as he rolled over and pulled the duvet over his head was that his decision to abandon me during the most terrifying moment of my life would cost him his career, his reputation, and every cent he thought he owned. My name is Loretta Diaz. I am 33 years old. Before I tell you exactly how a simple supply chain director dismantled a corrupt regional vice president, please hit the like and subscribe button if you enjoy seeing a toxic manipulator get handed the bill for his own arrogance. Welcome to Emily Told Stories. I would also love to know in the comments below, how old are you and where are you listening from tonight? The tearing sensation in my lower abdomen felt like a serrated knife twisting through my core. I gasped, clutching the heavy mattress fabric. My breath came in short, jagged bursts. The bedroom was pitch black, illuminated only by the faint blue glow of Nathan's smartwatch, charging on the nightstand. Outside, the wind howled, hurling ice against the glass panes of our Detroit suburb home. I reached across the expanse of our king-size bed, my fingers trembling and slick with cold sweat, found his shoulder. "Nathan," I whispered, my voice cracking under the weight of the agony. "Nathan, wake up. Something is wrong. The baby is coming." He shifted, a heavy, irritated sigh escaping his lips. Nathan was a 36-year-old vice president of regional sales for a logistics software firm. He wore tailored suits, kept his hair meticulously styled, and treated his calendar like a holy text. Any deviation from his schedule was treated as a personal insult. He did not sit up. He simply blinked his eyes open, staring at the dark ceiling. "Loretta," he groaned, his tone dripping with profound annoyance. "It is the middle of the night. I am bleeding." I choked out, a raw panic rising in my throat. "I am only 34 weeks along. We need to go to the emergency room right now." He rubbed his face, letting out a sharp breath of pure inconvenience. He flipped on the bedside lamp. The sudden yellow light stung my eyes, but it illuminated the dark, terrifying stain spreading across my side of the bed. Nathan looked at the sheets. His face did not register fear or concern for his unborn son. His jaw tightened in sheer disgust. "Do you have any idea what time it is?" he snapped, throwing the covers off his legs. "I have the Midwest Regional rollout pitch at 9 o'clock this morning. I have been preparing for this promotion for 6 months. If I walk into that boardroom sleep-deprived because you decided to panic over false labor, I lose the entire quarter." "It is not false labor," I sobbed, gripping my stomach as another blinding contraction tore through my body. "I cannot drive. You have to take me." Nathan stood up. He walked over to his mahogany dresser. For a split second, my desperate brain thought he was getting his car keys. Instead, he picked up his designer wallet. He slipped out a crisp $100 bill, walked back to the bed, and dropped it onto the mattress right beside my trembling hand. "Call an Uber," he said flatly. "Tell the driver to drive slow if the roads are bad. I am not spending the night sitting in a hard plastic chair while you cry. Shut the door on your way out so the wind does not wake me up again." He climbed back into bed, turned his back to me, and reached up to turn off the lamp. The room plunged back into darkness. I sat frozen on the edge of the mattress. My heart hammered against my ribs, but the tears instantly stopped falling. Crying implies you believe the person watching actually cares about your pain. In that pitch-black room, listening to the rhythmic breathing of the man I had built a life with, a terrifying clarity washed over my mind. I picked up the crumpled bill. The paper felt rough against my damp skin. I forced myself to stand, biting my lip hard enough to taste copper, as another wave of pain hit. I pulled a pair of gray sweatpants over my shaking legs, grabbed my pre-packed hospital bag from the closet, and walked out the front door. The freezing Midwestern air hit my face like a physical blow, burying my boots in 4 inches of fresh snow. I was entirely alone, clutching the exact amount of cash my husband believed our family was worth. The heater in my SUV blasted dry, scorching air against my freezing face, but my teeth kept chattering uncontrollably. I gripped the cold leather steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned a bruised shade of purple. The Detroit roads were unplowed, a chaotic expanse of drifting white that made the familiar route to the hospital feel like navigating a barren alien landscape. My tires slipped on a patch of black ice, the anti-lock brakes grinding loudly as I steered into a sharp turn onto the main avenue. Another contraction hit. It did not build slowly. It crashed over me, a searing wave of agony that forced my eyes shut for a terrifying second. I slammed my heavy winter boot onto the brake pedal, the vehicle sliding sideways before finally catching traction against a snowbank. I sat there, in the middle of the empty frozen intersection, breathing raggedly into the icy silence of the car cabin. I looked down at the passenger seat. The $100 bill Nathan had thrown at me lay there, in the dim dashboard light, mocking my pain. Staring at that crumpled piece of green paper, a memory from 3 months ago surfaced, sharp and stinging in my mind. We were sitting at a prime table inside a dimly lit upscale steakhouse downtown, surrounded by Nathan's regional board members. The executives were drinking expensive scotch, celebrating the end of a lucrative fiscal quarter. The chief executive officer, a sharp-eyed man named Donovan, had turned to me and politely asked about my role as a supply chain director. Before I could even formulate a professional response, Nathan let out a loud, patronizing laugh. He draped his heavy arm over my shoulders, treating me like a cute, naive pet on display for his colleagues. "Do not bore Donovan with warehouse logistics, Loretta," Nathan had said, grinning widely at his boss. "She is basically a glorified box counter. She tracks shipping pallets so the real closers can bring in the actual revenue." The entire table chuckled politely. I felt a hot flush of intense humiliation burn my cheeks. I spent my days managing multi-million-dollar international freight contracts, analyzing complex vendor data, and untangling logistical nightmares that would bankrupt most companies. Yet my own husband reduced my entire professional existence to moving cardboard boxes. He genuinely believed his software sales pitches required unparalleled genius, while my deep analytical skills were nothing more than tedious administrative chores. That blind arrogance was his defining characteristic. He never understood that people who track missing inventory for a living are exceptionally talented at noticing when small details do not add up. His fatal underestimation of my intelligence was the exact flaw that would eventually seal his fate. A blaring horn from a passing city snowplow snapped me back to the brutal present. I shifted the car into drive and forced myself to keep moving through the blizzard. By the time I reached the emergency room entrance, I could barely stand upright. The automatic sliding doors parted, and I stumbled toward the brightly lit triage desk, leaving a trail of melted snow and amniotic fluid on the polished linoleum floor. A triage nurse took one look at my pale, sweating face and rushed a wheelchair around the counter. From that exact moment, the quiet isolation of my snowy drive shattered into terrifying medical chaos. The bright fluorescent lights overhead blurred into a continuous white streak as they wheeled me swiftly down the busy corridor. My vision swam dangerously. A blood pressure cuff tightened painfully around my upper arm. The numbers flashing on the digital monitor caused the attending physician to drop his clipboard onto the counter. "We need a trauma bay right now," the doctor shouted, his voice cutting through the ringing in my ears. "Her pressure is climbing dangerously high. Get the stroke protocol ready." I tried to ask what was happening, but my tongue felt thick and entirely useless. A team of skilled nurses surrounded the narrow hospital bed, swiftly inserting intravenous lines into my bruised veins. "You have severe preeclampsia," a specialist explained, leaning close to my face so I could focus on her steady gaze. "Your internal organs are under extreme stress, Loretta. We are dealing with a critical risk of seizure or stroke. We have to deliver this baby immediately." The next 12 hours dissolved into a grueling nightmare of surgical prep blinding overhead lights and the metallic clatter of medical instruments. I lay strapped securely to the operating table, shivering without control as the spinal block numbed the lower half of my body. A sterile blue drape blocked my view of the surgical field. Every other woman in that maternity ward had a partner holding her hand, whispering words of encouragement, sharing the terrifying burden of bringing a new life into the world. I had the steady, indifferent rhythm of a heart monitor and the cold grip of an anesthesia nurse whom I had met 20 minutes prior. My chest felt incredibly tight, restricted by rising fear and the dangerous spike in my blood pressure. But beneath the overwhelming terror, a hardened layer of resolve began to form. I was fighting for 2 lives now. If my body gave out on this table, my unborn child would be left alone with a man who prioritized a regional software pitch over his own flesh and blood. I closed my eyes, focusing all my fading energy on the steady beat of my own heart, silently promising my baby that I would survive this brutal ordeal. A sudden sharp tug pulled at my abdomen, followed by an intense, hollow pressure. Then, the most beautiful sound in the entire universe pierced the sterile air of the operating room. A thin, frantic cry echoed off the pale tile walls. "He is small," the surgeon announced, a note of genuine relief in his voice, "but he is fighting hard." They briefly lowered the blue surgical drape, allowing me a fleeting glimpse of my son, Mateo. He was tiny, flushed a deep red and waving his miniature fists in the cold air. A pediatric nurse whisked him away to the neonatal intensive care unit for specialized observation, but knowing he was breathing gave my exhausted body permission to finally let go. The heavy surgical medication pulled me under a deep, dreamless sleep. When I eventually opened my heavy eyelids, the harsh lights of the operating theater had been replaced by the dim, quiet shadows of a high-risk recovery room. I was buried under thick, heated blankets, my body aching with a dull, persistent throb from the fresh surgical incision. My mouth tasted like dry cotton. The wall clock ticked rhythmically in the background. It was mid-afternoon. The winter sun cast long, pale beams across the floor. I turned my head slowly on the stiff pillow, scanning the row of empty visitor chairs lining the opposite wall. The heavy silence of the room settled over me like a suffocating shroud. I had survived the hardest night of my life, brought a child into the world, and evaded a lethal medical complication. And as I stared at the empty doorway, the crushing reality of my situation finally took hold. Nathan was not there. He had not rushed to the hospital. He had not called the nurses' station. I was entirely alone, and the battle for my future was only just beginning. The sterile scent of iodine and bleached cotton linens anchored me to the present reality. I lay perfectly still against the stiff mattress of the high-risk recovery ward, listening to the rhythmic hiss of the oxygen concentrator mounted on the wall. Heavy pneumatic compression boots squeezed my calves in alternating cycles to prevent blood clots. I was a captive in my own healing body, tethered to the hospital bed by a tangle of translucent intravenous tubes. The surgical incision across my lower abdomen throbbed with a relentless burning ache, a harsh reminder of the emergency procedure that had saved my life and delivered my son. I turned my head toward the small plastic tray table positioned near my shoulder. My smartphone vibrated, the short buzz breaking the suffocating silence of the private room. 12 agonizing hours had passed since I dragged myself through the freezing Michigan blizzard. I reached for the device, wincing as the movement pulled at my fresh stitches. The screen illuminated the dim space, displaying a single incoming text message from Nathan. Pitch prep went great. Exhausted. Glad you are fine. 8 careless words. No frantic questions asking if his son was healthy. No apologies for his absence. No concern for the fact that I had nearly suffered a fatal stroke on an operating table. While I was bleeding and fighting for a chance to watch my child grow up, my husband was practicing his confident boardroom handshake and reviewing his presentation slides. He viewed my traumatic emergency merely as a fortunate scheduling break that granted him a quiet house to rehearse his corporate jargon. How does a woman react when her marriage finally dies? It does not happen with a dramatic scream or a shattering of glass. It happens with a silent, tectonic shift inside the soul. The sheer, suffocating apathy radiating from that tiny digital bubble acted as a chemical catalyst within my chest. The last fragile thread of my affection snapped, falling away into an empty abyss. I did not shed a single tear. Crying would require mourning a man who never truly existed. Instead, a freezing, hyper-focused calm washed over my entire nervous system. The grieving wife vanished, replaced instantly by the seasoned supply chain director who knew how to operate in a crisis. I needed to redirect my mind before the rising panic over my premature baby consumed my fragile energy. I leaned back against the stiff hospital pillows and opened my secure work email application on my phone. My entire career revolves around restoring order to chaotic situations, finding the lost variables in complex international equations. I scrolled through my inbox, letting the familiar corporate terminology soothe my fractured nerves. A flagged automated message caught my attention. It was a high-priority warehouse alert regarding a regional logistics discrepancy. A sizable shipment of heavy machinery components had vanished from our primary transit hub somewhere between Chicago and Detroit. The manifest showed the freight pallets were successfully loaded onto the trucks, but the destination receiving logs were entirely blank. Under normal circumstances, missing cargo is just a bureaucratic headache, a simple routing error to be investigated by a floor manager. I stared at the mismatched tracking numbers on the screen, feeling a strange prickle of intuition at the base of my neck. Supply chain management is the delicate art of forensic tracking. When a shipment disappears, it always leaves a shadow in the ledgers. Something about this specific routing path felt intentionally obscured. 5 shipping containers booked under a dummy corporate account had somehow bypassed our standard weigh stations. It was a sophisticated manipulation, a phantom shipment that existed on paper but vanished in physical transit. My brain thrives on solving discrepancies. I forwarded the alert to my private secure drive, flagging it for a deep dive audit on Monday. I tucked the administrative anomaly away in the back of my mind, unaware that this seemingly boring logistics report would soon become the exact weapon I needed to destroy my husband. My focus needed to shift back to my son. Mateo was down the hall in the neonatal intensive care unit. Premature infants require round-the-clock specialized medical observation, which translates to staggering hospital bills. I needed to access our digital health insurance portal to ensure the billing department had the correct policy numbers on file before the daily charges multiplied beyond control. I gingerly rolled onto my side, ignoring the sharp sting radiating through my core, and reached into the canvas overnight bag resting on the visitor chair beside the bed. I pulled out our shared family tablet. Nathan and I kept the device in our living room for managing household utility expenses and streaming television shows. Because my husband viewed technology primarily as a mirror reflecting his own importance, he rarely paid attention to basic digital security settings. He operated under the deeply arrogant assumption that he was always the smartest person in any room. That overwhelming hubris made him dangerously sloppy. I tapped the glass screen, intending to open the web browser. Before my finger could even reach the blue icon, a gray notification banner slid down from the top edge of the display. Then a second banner appeared. Then a third. My breath hitched in my throat. Nathan had recently purchased a new smartphone for his promotion push and carelessly authorized a full cloud synchronization across all our shared Apple devices. His private messaging application was mirroring in real time right in front of my eyes. I stared at the glowing blue and gray bubbles populating the tablet screen. The contact name at the very top of the rapid thread was Taylor. I knew exactly who she was. Taylor was a 24-year-old junior accounts manager at his logistics software firm. I had met her at the company holiday gala last December. She had smiled brightly, complimented my velvet dress, and spent the remainder of the evening laughing far too loudly at every single joke my husband made. My thumbs hovered over the glass as I scrolled up, tracing the digital timeline of a meticulously planned betrayal. This was not a momentary lapse in judgment or a fleeting emotional affair fueled by a late-night office party. It was a calculated, predatory campaign. I read messages dated weeks ago where they openly complained about my high-risk pregnancy. "She is just a boring warehouse manager," Nathan had typed, his words a toxic echo of his behavior at the steakhouse. "She is always tired and complaining about her blood pressure. I cannot wait until this regional restructuring is finished." My stomach turned to lead as I read further. He had sent her a dozen high-resolution screenshots of luxury beachfront rental properties in Miami. The captions underneath the photos promised a fresh start, a beautiful new life together, far away from the freezing Midwestern winters and the heavy burden of a crying newborn. They were planning a seamless escape. He was actively designing a tropical future that required my total erasure from his life. The text messages were a masterclass in narcissistic delusion. He referred to me merely as a stepping stone, a temporary inconvenience standing in the way of his happiness. He promised Taylor that his upcoming regional promotion would unlock a substantial executive bonus, providing the exact funding they needed to sign a lease on the oceanfront penthouse. I read a message where Taylor asked if the premature baby was going to slow down their timeline. Nathan replied with a laughing emoji. He typed, "She is too obsessed with counting boxes at her job. I have a legal strategy in motion. I will have the cash and my freedom by spring. Just be patient." The phrase, "legal strategy," sent a shard of pure ice straight into my veins. He was planning to strike. To execute a legal strategy against a resourceful wife, a man needs profound financial dominance. My hands began to shake, no longer from the lingering chill of the surgical drugs, but from the raw adrenaline of a prey animal realizing the predator is already inside the house. He was not just cheating on me. A man planning to lease a luxury penthouse in Florida needs a vast amount of liquid capital. He needs untraceable cash reserves. The puzzle pieces rapidly clicked together in my analytical brain. If he was preparing to abandon his family and launch a legal war, he would never leave his financial resources vulnerable to a marital division of assets. I minimized the messaging application, my heart pounding a frantic, terrifying rhythm against my ribs. I immediately searched for the banking icon on the tablet home screen. I needed to see the balances of our joint accounts, and I needed to see them right now. I navigated away from the messaging application, my fingers flying across the glass screen with practiced precision. The initial shock of Nathan's betrayal had crystallized into a cold, hard focus. I was a woman accustomed to managing multi-million-dollar international freight contracts, analyzing complex vendor data, and untangling logistical nightmares. The chaos of human emotion was messy, but numbers were clean, logical, and absolute. I needed to see the data. I needed to understand the scope of the financial battlefield he had prepared while I was bleeding in the trauma bay. I found the icon for our primary banking institution and tapped it. The application required facial recognition, but because Nathan had synced all his devices without implementing secondary security protocols, the tablet accepted my administrator override password. The screen loaded, displaying the dashboard of our joint checking and savings accounts. I stared at the numbers glowing against the white background. My breath caught in my throat, a sharp, physical pain that rivaled the ache of my surgical incision. The accounts were decimated. Our primary joint savings account, a fund we had meticulously built over 4 years of marriage, meant to cover our mortgage, emergency expenses, and the arrival of our child, showed a balance of $287. Yesterday, that account held over $150,000. I clicked into the transaction history, my eyes scanning the digital ledger with the speed of a seasoned auditor. The money had not vanished into thin air. It had been systematically transferred out in 3 massive increments over the past 48 hours. The destination routing number belonged to an external, unrecognized financial institution. Nathan had not just planned a tropical escape. He had actively stolen my financial security while I was incapacitated. The sheer malice of his timing was breathtaking. He had waited until I was trapped in a hospital bed, physically unable to intervene, to execute his financial drain. He weaponized my vulnerable postpartum state to cripple me. This was not a man merely leaving his wife for a younger woman. This was a calculated financial execution designed to leave me destitute and completely dependent on whatever scraps he decided to throw my way. A soft knock on the heavy wooden door interrupted my frantic scrolling. I minimized the banking application, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm, and forced my face into a neutral expression. "Come in," I called, out, my voice steadier than I felt. A hospital billing administrator pushed the door open, carrying a digital clipboard. She offered a polite, practiced smile. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Diaz," she said, her tone gentle. "I hate to disturb you while you are recovering, but we need to process the payment for the premium breast pump upgrade you requested during admission. It is a $400 charge that falls outside your standard insurance coverage. We just need to swipe your card to finalize the order." I forced a tight smile, nodding. "Of course," I replied. "My purse is in the closet. The black leather wallet is right on top." The administrator retrieved my wallet and handed me the heavy metallic credit card we used for all major household expenses. It was linked directly to our primary checking account, which, until 10 minutes ago, I believed was flush with funds. I handed her the card, maintaining a facade of calm compliance. She swiped it through the card reader attached to her tablet. The machine beeped a sharp, discordant sound that filled the quiet room. The administrator frowned, tapping the screen. "It looks like the transaction was declined," she said, her voice dropping to a sympathetic whisper. "Sometimes the bank flags unusual medical charges as potential fraud. Do you have an alternate form of payment?" I stared at the declined card in her hand. The cold reality of my situation slammed into me with the force of a freight train. Nathan had not just drained the savings. He had systematically severed my access to all our credit lines. He canceled my secondary cards while I was in active surgery, stranding me with massive medical deductibles and an immediate need to provide for a premature infant. He was attempting to starve me out before the war even began. "I am sorry," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "It must be a fraud alert. I will have to contact the bank and resolve it. Can we delay the upgrade until tomorrow?" The administrator offered a reassuring nod. "Absolutely, Mrs. Diaz. We can hold the order. Just let us know when you have sorted it out with your bank." She handed the card back and quietly exited the room, leaving me alone with the crushing weight of my financial ruin. I sat alone in the dim hospital room, staring at the useless piece of plastic in my hand. Nathan had played a masterful game. He had stripped me of my resources, leaving me helpless and entirely dependent. He expected me to panic, to call him sobbing, begging for access to our money so I could buy food and diapers for our son. He wanted me broken, compliant, and desperate. But Nathan had made a fatal miscalculation. He viewed my career in supply chain management as a tedious, unglamorous, administrative chore. He failed to realize that people who track missing inventory across global networks are exceptionally skilled at following a paper trail. He thought he could steal my money and vanish into the sunshine, assuming I would simply accept my fate and fade into obscurity. I placed the declined credit card on the tray table and picked up the tablet. The fear and panic evaporated, replaced entirely by a cold, calculating fury. I was a woman who built her life on analyzing complex logistical puzzles and restoring order to chaotic systems. Nathan had just declared war on a supply chain director, and he had stupidly left the digital ledger wide open. I opened a secure encrypted document on the tablet, my fingers flying across the virtual keyboard. I began mapping out the battlefield, creating a meticulous timeline of his betrayals, cataloging every missing dollar, every stolen asset, and every fraudulent transaction. The freezing Midwestern storm raged outside the hospital window, a perfect reflection of the icy resolve settling deep within my core. Nathan believed he held all the cards. He believed his high-powered executive status made him untouchable. He believed I was just a naive, exhausted mother who would quietly accept defeat. But as I compiled the data, preparing to dismantle his carefully constructed empire, I realized he had no idea what was coming. The hunt was officially on, and I would not rest until I had recovered every single cent he had stolen and ensured he paid the ultimate price for his arrogance. I stared at the empty banking portal until the digital screen timed out, plunging the hospital recovery room back into dim, quiet shadows. My pulse thumped a steady, hard rhythm behind my eyes, echoing the rhythmic hiss of the oxygen concentrator mounted on the wall. The financial theft was a devastating blow, but my professional instincts warned me it was only the first phase of a broader offensive operation. A man does not drain his own checking account just to run away to a tropical beach. He drains it to fund a war. I swiped past the banking applications and opened the local file manager on the tablet. Nathan treated this device as his personal briefcase during his evening television routines, often downloading attachments directly to the hard drive instead of reading them on the cloud. I scrolled through mundane folders containing golf swing analysis videos, regional sales quotas, and software pitch decks. Then, nested quietly beneath a folder labeled tax documents, I spotted it. It was a compressed zip file titled Exit Strategy. The file was unprotected by any password. Hubris is a predictable, fatal vulnerability. I tapped the folder, watching it unzip a dozen portable document formats and saved email chains. The sender on the primary correspondence was a man named Gordon Hale. I recognized the name from the aggressive billboards towering over the Detroit interstate highways. Gordon was a high-profile family law attorney, notorious for representing wealthy executives in ruthless, scorched-earth divorces. He specialized in destroying spouses. I opened the first email thread, dated 2 months prior to my emergency delivery. The subject line read, Asset Protection and Custody Parameters. I zoomed in on the harsh black text reading Gordon's clinical assessment of our marital estate. The attorney advised Nathan that divorcing a high-earning supply chain director in a no-fault state would result in an equal division of assets and significant child support obligations. That, as Gordon wrote, unless we can establish severe unfitness on the part of the mother to secure sole legal and physical custody. A second document caught my eye, its thumbnail displaying a familiar layout. I opened it and felt the blood freeze in my veins. It was a scanned copy of a contract I had signed in our kitchen just 3 weeks ago. The title read, Temporary Medical and Financial Proxy. My throat tightened as a vivid memory surfaced. We were standing by the marble kitchen island, drinking our morning coffee, while the winter wind rattled the window panes. Nathan had placed the paper in front of me, his face a flawless mask of deep, husbandly concern. He claimed his software firm was finalizing his regional vice president bonus, but their human resources department had flagged a sudden liability issue. Because my pregnancy was heavily classified as high risk due to escalating blood pressure, Nathan argued that any catastrophic medical complications or extensive neonatal intensive care unit bills could prompt the hospital to place a lien against his upcoming bonus payout. He had spun a convincing, urgent tale about shielding our liquid cash, protecting our future, and ensuring we had a financial safety net for the baby. He asked me to sign the temporary proxy merely as a bureaucratic shield to separate our liabilities. I had trusted the man I married. I had signed the paper, handed him the pen, and thanked him for looking out for our family. Looking at the scanned document now, the dense legal jargon stripped away his lies. This was not a protective shield. It was a loaded weapon. The proxy granted Nathan unilateral authority to make binding medical and legal decisions on my behalf if a physician deemed me incapacitated. I clicked the next attachment in the folder. It was a draft for an emergency ex parte motion. An ex parte motion is a rare legal maneuver designed to be filed directly with a judge without giving the opposing party any advance notice, typically reserved for immediate domestic threats where a child is in imminent danger. I read the stated grounds for the motion, feeling a cold sweat break across my forehead. Nathan and Gordon were planning to claim I was suffering from severe postpartum psychosis. The drafted petition was a masterful tapestry of twisted truths and fabricated symptoms. It cited my demanding career managing international freight networks as a source of extreme destabilizing mental stress. It documented my preeclampsia not as a physical cardiovascular condition, but as definitive proof of my failing physical and mental fortitude. It claimed my sudden emergency surgery had triggered a dangerous psychological break, rendering me a direct physical threat to the newborn infant. Gordon had taken my late nights coordinating global shipping routes and framed them as manic episodes of neglect. He took my analytical focus and painted it as an obsessive paranoia. Nathan did not want to raise Mateo. He viewed children as noisy, expensive inconveniences that disrupted his carefully curated lifestyle and pristine weekend golf schedule. But the final pages of the legal documents laid his true motivation bare. If Nathan secured 100% physical and legal custody through this emergency motion, he would owe zero child support. He would effectively eliminate his largest long-term financial liability, trapping me in a position where I would have to endure supervised visits and pay him just to see my own son. The final email in the chain outlined the execution phase of their plan. Gordon instructed Nathan to wait until the hospital administered my heavy, post-surgical narcotics. When I was floating on a cloud of high-dose painkillers, physically immobile and chemically subdued, Gordon planned to send a process server directly into my maternity recovery room. They would serve me the papers, trigger the medical proxy, citing my heavily medicated state as proof of incapacitation, and force me to sign away my parental rights, before I even possessed the cognitive clarity to dial a phone or summon an attorney. I closed my eyes, letting the heavy tablet rest against my chest. The quiet, steady hum of the medical machinery filled the silence of the room. I pictured Mateo down the hall, confined to a clear plastic incubator, his tiny chest rising and falling beneath a web of monitoring wires. He was innocent, fragile, and fighting for every single breath. The man who contributed half his genetics viewed him merely as a strategic pawn in a financial chess match. My supply chain background trained me to view every crisis as a series of interconnected logistical nodes. When a vendor breaches a critical contract, you do not panic. You quarantine the damaged inventory, audit the ledger, and sever the supply line. Nathan was the breached contract. Gordon Hale was the hostile vendor. My infant son and my livelihood were the invaluable assets requiring immediate, ruthless quarantine. I could not sit here and wait for a process server to walk through that heavy wooden door. I was tethered to this bed by intravenous tubes physically broken and recovering from major abdominal surgery. But my mind was sharpening into a lethal instrument. Nathan thought he had cornered his target in a freezing, desolate wasteland. He assumed he could waltz into this hospital room tomorrow morning and claim an effortless victory over an exhausted, defeated woman. I needed an impenetrable physical barrier to keep him out of this room. I needed a legal barricade to shield my son from his proxy trap. Most importantly, I needed fierce allies who operated far outside of my husband's sphere of influence. I reached for my smartphone, resting on the bedside table, ignoring the sharp sting of the needle shifting in the back of my hand. The time for silent observation was over. The counteroffensive had to begin tonight, long before the morning sun could illuminate the wreckage of my marriage. The realization that my husband intended to weaponize my medical trauma to steal my son and my financial future hit me like a physical blow. The sterile hospital room suddenly felt like a shrinking cage. I needed to move, to act, to build defenses before the morning sun brought his high-priced attorney to my bedside. I picked up my phone, my fingers flying across the screen, dialing the one person in this world whose loyalty was absolute. My older sister Carmen was a force of nature. A veteran Detroit public school teacher, she spent her days managing overcrowded classrooms and navigating bureaucratic red tape with a terrifying efficiency. She did not tolerate nonsense, and she certainly did not tolerate anyone threatening her family. Carmen answered on the second ring. Before she could even ask how I was feeling, I cut her off. "I need you here right now," I said, my voice low and urgent. "Bring Dave. Do not tell anyone you are coming." There was a split second of silence on the line, the kind of silence that precedes a storm. "We are on our way," she replied, the protective edge in her voice unmistakable. Less than an hour later, the heavy wooden door of my recovery room swung open. Carmen marched in her winter coat speckled with melting snow, her eyes scanning the room like a general surveying a battlefield. Her husband, Dave, a quiet, sturdy man who worked as a union foreman at a local auto plant, followed close behind. They were my chosen family, the antithesis of Nathan's pretentious, image-obsessed relatives. "What happened?" Carmen demanded, pulling a chair close to my bed. Her gaze was sharp, dissecting the monitors and the exhaustion etched across my face. I did not waste time with tears or pleasantries. I laid out the stark reality of Nathan's betrayal. I explained the drained bank accounts, the canceled credit cards, and the chilling contents of the exit strategy folder. I detailed the medical proxy trap and his plan to claim postpartum psychosis to secure sole custody of Mateo. Carmen's face hardened into a mask of pure, unfiltered fury. Dave crossed his thick arms over his chest, his jaw clenching so tight a muscle ticked in his cheek. He did not say a word, but the steady, dangerous look in his eyes promised that Nathan would not walk away from this unscathed. "We need to establish a perimeter," I said, the supply chain director within me taking full command of the situation. "He is going to try to send a process server into this room tomorrow morning. He might even try to come himself to enforce the proxy." Carmen nodded, pulling a notepad and a pen from her purse. "What do we do first?" "We lock him out of the medical system," I replied. I pressed the call button clipped to my bed rail. A few minutes later, the night shift charge nurse entered the room. I asked her to pull up my medical file and Mateo's pediatric charts. Using the strict provisions of the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, I formally revoked Nathan's access to all medical information. I instructed the nurse to remove his name from the authorized visitor list and explicitly stated that if he or anyone claiming to represent him attempted to enter the maternity ward, hospital security was to be notified immediately. The nurse, a seasoned professional who had likely witnessed her fair share of domestic crises, did not ask probing questions. She updated the digital records, printed the confirmation forms for my signature, and assured me the security desk would be fully briefed on the situation. With the legal and medical barricade in place, I turned to the physical defense. "Carmen, I need you at that door tomorrow morning," I instructed. "You do not let anyone in unless they are wearing a hospital badge. If someone tries to serve papers, you refuse to accept them and call security." Carmen squared her shoulders. "He will have to go through me to get to that door," she stated, her tone leaving no room for argument. "And trust me, that software salesman does not want to go through me." The perimeter was secured, but defense alone does not win a war. I needed offensive intelligence. I needed undeniable, concrete evidence of Nathan's financial assets to counter his impending legal assault. The drained bank accounts proved he was hoarding liquid capital, but I needed to know exactly where he was hiding the money and how he planned to fund his tropical escape with Taylor. The answer lay buried deep within the corporate servers of his logistics software firm. Nathan was arrogant enough to believe his work network was an impenetrable fortress, but I knew the architecture of those systems intimately. The problem was access. The hospital's guest wireless network was heavily restricted, throttled by security firewalls that blocked virtual private network connections and prevented secure data tunneling. I needed an open line. I remembered the young IT technician who had visited my room earlier that evening to troubleshoot a glitch with the interactive patient television monitor. He was a bright kid, fresh out of college, wearing a faded comic book t-shirt under his hospital scrubs. He had chatted enthusiastically about his home lab server setup while resetting the television interface. I asked Dave to go to the nurse's station and see if the tech was still on shift. 10 minutes later, Dave returned with the young man in tow. The tech looked a bit confused to be summoned back to the high-risk recovery ward at this hour. "Is the television acting up again, Mrs. Diaz?" he asked, holding his tablet. I offered a weary, appreciative smile. "The television is fine," I said, "but I have a rather urgent problem, and I am hoping you might be willing to help me." I spun a carefully constructed, entirely plausible narrative. I explained that I was a supply chain director for a major automotive manufacturer, and my sudden emergency hospitalization had left a critical international freight contract hanging in the balance. I told him my team was locked out of a secure server because I had the primary authentication credentials, and if I did not log in and authorize the release within the hour, a massive shipment of heavy machinery components would be stranded in a European port, costing the company millions. I gestured to the restricted guest network icon on my tablet. "I just need to establish a brief encrypted tunnel to my corporate network," I explained, pitching my voice to convey professional desperation. "But the hospital firewall is aggressively blocking my VPN client. I know it is a massive breach of protocol, but is there any way you could temporarily whitelist my device's media access control address? Or route me through a less restricted subnet just for 20 minutes? The young tech hesitated, shifting his weight uneasily. "I am really not supposed to bypass the firewall rules for patient devices," he murmured, looking nervously at the door. I knew exactly how to appeal to his technical ego. "I understand," I said gently. "It is a complex network architecture, and I would never ask you to risk the integrity of the hospital's main servers. I just figured if anyone knew how to implement a secure localized override without triggering the automated intrusion detection systems, it would be the guy who runs a custom enterprise home lab in his spare time." His posture straightened slightly, a flicker of pride replacing his hesitation. He looked at my tablet, then at the monitors tracking my elevated blood pressure. "I suppose I could temporarily assign your device to the Administrative Diagnostic Virtual Local Area Network," he offered quietly. "It bypasses the primary content filters and allows encrypted tunneling. But I can only leave the port open for half an hour before the automated audit logs flag the anomaly." 30 minutes is all I need," I assured him, handing over the tablet. He tapped a sequence of commands into his own device, syncing the connection protocols. My tablet screen refreshed, the restricted network icon, vanishing, replaced by the solid connection symbol of a secure, unthrottled line. He handed the tablet back. "You have 30 minutes, Mrs. Diaz. Please do not download any massive files." I thanked him profusely, watching him exit the room. The moment the door clicked shut, the grateful patient facade dissolved. I activated my secure VPN client, the encrypted tunnel establishing a direct line to the external servers. I did not route the connection to my automotive company. I routed it directly to the login portal of Nathan's logistics software firm. Nathan's arrogance was not limited to his personal devices. He utilized the exact same complex password for his home tablet as he did for his corporate administrative access. I typed the credentials into the portal, the cursor blinking rhythmically against the dark screen. The authentication server processed the request. A green confirmation banner flashed across the top of the display. I was inside. I bypassed the standard employee dashboard, navigating deep into the restricted administrative directories. I needed to see his expense reports, his client retention ledgers, and the detailed financial audits he submitted to the regional board. The digital landscape of his professional life unfolded before me. I opened a folder labeled Q4 Expense Reconciliations. The spreadsheets were massive, tracking hundreds of thousands of dollars in corporate spending. My eyes scanned the rows of data, searching for discrepancies. A supply chain director knows that true fraud rarely hides in the grand totals. It hides in the mundane, overlooked details. It hides in the seemingly legitimate vendor invoices and the routine travel expenditures. As I began to cross-reference the dates of his alleged client retention dinners with the corporate credit card statements, the first massive crack in his pristine executive armor appeared. The numbers did not just tell a story of infidelity, they told a story of systemic, calculated theft. The financial drain on our personal accounts was a mere shadow compared to the staggering corporate fraud unraveling on the screen. The trap he set for me was child's play compared to the federal net he had unknowingly woven for himself. The soft blue light from the tablet screen cast long shadows across the sterile white blankets covering my legs. Outside the hospital window, the Detroit snowstorm continued to rage, rattling the glass panes. But inside my room, the only sound was the steady rhythmic hum of the medical machinery keeping my blood pressure in check. I sat upright, ignoring the dull, persistent burn of my surgical incision, my fingers gliding across the digital keyboard. Navigating Nathan's corporate network felt like walking through a familiar, well-mapped neighborhood. I knew the architecture of regional logistics software. I understood how expense reports were filed, approved, and buried. I opened the directory labeled Fourth Quarter Regional Expenditures. The ledgers loaded on my screen, presenting hundreds of line items detailing client retention dinners, out-of-state travel, and executive networking events. To an untrained eye, the spreadsheets represented a hardworking vice president dedicating his evenings to securing lucrative contracts. To a supply chain director, the numbers painted a glaring picture of theft. I picked up my smartphone with my free hand and opened a web browser, navigating to Taylor's public social media profile. The 24-year-old junior accounts manager possessed an endless appetite for digital validation. Her grid was a curated gallery of expensive cocktails, dim restaurant lighting, and hotel balconies. I placed the phone right next to the tablet, creating a split screen of Nathan's professional lies and Taylor's photographic reality. The cross-referencing took less than 10 minutes. On October 14th, Nathan submitted a corporate expense claim for an $800 dinner at a premier Chicago steakhouse, listing the attendees as 3 senior executives from a Midwest shipping conglomerate. I tapped on a photograph Taylor posted on that exact same date. The image showcased a distinctive smoking dry ice cocktail resting on a dark mahogany table. The location tag clearly identified the same Chicago steakhouse. In the background of her photo, slightly blurred but undeniable, rested Nathan's customized silver watch resting on the edge of a bread plate. I moved down the ledger. A $2,000 charge for a boutique hotel suite in Nashville justified in his expense report as an emergency vendor negotiation summit. Taylor's corresponding post from that weekend featured her posing in a plush white robe on a hotel balcony overlooking the Nashville skyline, the caption boasting about a surprise romantic getaway. He was not just cheating on his wife. He was treating his employer like a personal automated teller machine, financing a double life with stolen corporate funds. Embezzling expense accounts was a severe firing offense, enough to strip him of his title and his upcoming bonus. Yet as I stared at the luxury hotel receipts, a cold knot formed in my stomach. A man preparing to lease a multi-million-dollar beachfront penthouse in Miami needed significantly more capital than a few stolen steak dinners could provide. The drained balance of our personal savings account was a substantial down payment, but it was not enough to sustain the extravagant future he promised his mistress. The real money, the kind of wealth that funded permanent tropical escapes, had to be coming from somewhere else. My analytical mind drifted back to the automated email alert I had flagged hours earlier. A phantom shipment of heavy machinery components had vanished between Chicago and Detroit. The physical freight was missing, but the digital manifest indicated a flawless delivery. Nathan's software firm provided the exact back-end routing integration used by my employer, the automotive manufacturer. His code governed the billing terminals at our way stations. I pulled up the system architecture for his regional corridor algorithms. It was a labyrinth of routing protocols, fuel surcharges, and transit tariffs. I searched for the specific billing logs tied to the missing Chicago freight. The screen populated with dense blocks of numerical data. I traced the digital signature of the transit invoice, following the money rather than the physical cargo. The revelation hit me with the force of a physical blow. The discrepancy was not a warehouse error. It was a highly sophisticated algorithmic skim. Nathan had hard-coded a hidden backdoor into the routing software. Whenever a major client shipped freight through the Midwest corridor, his algorithm artificially inflated the recorded tonnage by a fraction of a percent. He instituted a phantom charge, masking it deep within the invoices as an expedited regional fuel tariff. The automotive companies, dealing in hundreds of millions of dollars of freight, paid the inflated invoices without a second glance. The physical trucking companies, relying on their own scale tickets, received their standard accurate rate. The discrepancy, the overage generated by the phantom tariff, did not evaporate. It sat in a digital escrow holding account within the software's billing terminal. I typed a query to trace the outflow of that specific escrow account. The database hesitated for a fraction of a second before revealing the destination routing numbers. The stolen fractions of a percent were being siphoned out of the corporate network and funneled into 3 external entities: Apex Logistics Solutions, Horizon Freight Partners, Midwest Transit Incorporated. They sounded like legitimate regional vendors. They were not. I ran a swift search through the state corporate registry database. The screen displayed the official filing documents for all 3 entities. They were newly minted limited liability companies, registered anonymously in Delaware, just 6 months ago, right around the time Nathan began working late to prepare for his promotion. While the ownership was hidden behind corporate veils, the registered agent mailing address for all 3 companies was listed on the public filings. I stared at the street name and apartment number glowing on my screen. It was a luxury high-rise building downtown. It was the exact same address where Taylor rented her studio apartment. The scope of his arrogance was staggering. Nathan was utilizing his employer's proprietary software to systematically defraud his largest clients, skimming millions of dollars in fake shipping tariffs and laundering the proceeds through shell companies registered to his young, naive mistress. He was committing interstate wire fraud and corporate embezzlement on a massive federal scale. The penalty for falsifying expense reports was termination. The penalty for federal wire fraud was a decade inside a penitentiary. My fingers flew across the keyboard, moving with lethal precision. I downloaded the inflated transit invoices, the hidden routing algorithms, the offshore wire transfers, and the shell company registry documents. I compiled the expense report discrepancies, attaching Taylor's geotagged photographs to every single fraudulent corporate charge. I grouped the raw data into a single encrypted digital folder. I organized it with the meticulous, undeniable logic of a forensic audit. It was not a chaotic collection of suspicious receipts. It was a polished, airtight dossier. It was a loaded gun aimed directly at the foundation of his pristine executive life. I leaned back against my pillows, a dark, triumphant satisfaction settling deep into my bones. The medical proxy he planned to weaponize against me tomorrow morning was a desperate parlor trick compared to the federal net I currently held in my hands. I had the power to freeze his assets, revoke his freedom, and erase his name from the corporate world. I prepared to close the virtual private network connection, my thumb hovering over the disconnect icon. Suddenly, the quiet sanctuary of the maternity ward shattered. The heavy, muffled sound of a heated argument echoed through the corridor outside my room. I recognized the sharp, authoritative cadence of my sister Carmen. She was standing her ground at the threshold of my door, acting as the physical barricade I had requested. But the voice shouting back at her did not belong to a process server, and it did not belong to Nathan. It was a shrill, piercing tone, dripping with entitlement and demanding immediate entry. I recognized that grating pitch instantly. The digital war would have to wait. The physical invasion had arrived, and my mother-in-law Shirley was standing right outside my door. The heavy wooden door of my hospital room burst open with a startling crack that reverberated against the sterile white walls. The digital war I was waging on my tablet was instantly eclipsed by a physical invasion. My older sister Carmen, who had been acting as my steadfast barricade in the hallway, was practically shoved aside by the sheer aggressive momentum of the intruder. Standing in the threshold, her face a mask of furious entitlement, was my mother-in-law Shirley. Shirley was a woman who navigated the world draped in expensive fabrics and an impenetrable sense of superiority. She lived in a sprawling, meticulously manicured subdivision in Bloomfield Hills, funding her weekly country club luncheons and luxury car leases entirely through the generous allowance Nathan provided from his executive salary. She viewed me not as a daughter-in-law, but as an unfortunate working-class blemish on her son's pristine corporate image. She had always made it abundantly clear that my career in supply chain logistics was woefully inadequate compared to the glamorous life she believed Nathan deserved. She did not wear a visitor badge. She had bypassed the strict maternity ward security protocols, likely by tailgating a distracted nurse or leveraging her signature brand of haughty intimidation. Carmen recovered her balance, instantly stepping back into the doorway to block Shirley's path. "You cannot be in here," Carmen warned, her voice dropping to a dangerous low register. "She is recovering from major surgery. Leave now or I am calling security." Shirley ignored her completely. She marched past Carmen, her high heels clicking sharply against the linoleum floor, and stopped at the foot of my bed. She did not ask how I was feeling. She did not inquire about her premature grandson fighting for his life in the neonatal unit down the hall. Instead, she raised a thick blue legal folder in her right hand, waving it like a weapon. "Nathan told me everything," Shirley hissed, her eyes narrowing as she looked down at me. She smelled strongly of expensive floral perfume and stale gin. "He told me about your erratic behavior, Loretta. He told me about your dangerous obsession with your tedious little warehouse job, and how the stress of it caused this entire premature nightmare." I stared at her, keeping my face perfectly still, my fingers tightening around the edges of the tablet resting on my lap. Nathan had mobilized his forces. He was using his mother as a blunt instrument to terrorize me before the process server arrived with the custody papers. "You are completely unfit to raise my grandson," Shirley continued, her voice rising in pitch. "The doctors told Nathan about your soaring blood pressure. It is obvious you are suffering from some sort of severe psychological breakdown. You are a danger to that child." Carmen moved to intervene, her fists clenched at her sides, but I raised a single hand, signaling her to stop. I needed to see exactly what Shirley was holding. Shirley slapped the blue folder onto my rolling tray table. It landed with a heavy thud, sliding dangerously close to my water pitcher. "Inside that folder is a post-nuptial separation agreement drafted by Nathan's attorney," she stated, her tone dripping with venom. It is a generous offer, considering your mental instability. I slowly reached forward, ignoring the throbbing pain in my abdomen, and opened the cover. The document was a masterclass in financial subjugation. It outlined a total surrender. If I signed, I would forfeit all claims to our Detroit lake house, waive my right to any of Nathan's retirement accounts or executive bonuses, and most devastatingly, agree to grant Nathan primary physical custody of Mateo, citing my need for intensive psychological recovery. In exchange for giving up my home, my financial security, and my son, the agreement offered a single, pathetic, lump sum payout of $20,000. Sign it right now, Shirley commanded, tapping a perfectly manicured finger against the paper. If you refuse, Nathan will file an emergency injunction tomorrow morning. He will call Child Protective Services and report your postpartum psychosis. They will take the baby Loretta, and you will end up with absolutely nothing. Take the money, pack your cheap bags, and disappear. My mind raced. The supply chain director within me analyzed the variables with ruthless precision. If I fought her right now, if I presented the undeniable evidence of Nathan's federal wire fraud and embezzlement, she would panic. She would run straight to her son, alerting him that his corporate theft was exposed. Nathan would immediately attempt to destroy the digital evidence, hire a criminal defense attorney, and perhaps even flee the state with his stolen millions. I could not afford to spook my target before the trap was fully set. I needed Nathan complacent. I needed him to believe his cruel strategy had worked flawlessly. I needed him to drop his guard completely so he would walk blindly into the corporate execution I was preparing for him. I looked down at the insulting contract, and I made a rapid, tactical decision. I deployed a red herring. Instead of arguing, instead of throwing her out, I forced my breathing to become shallow and ragged. I let my shoulders slump, abandoning my rigid posture. I squeezed my eyes shut, forcing hot tears to spill over my lashes and trace rapid paths down my cheeks. "I cannot do this," I gasped, my voice trembling with manufactured hysteria. "I am so tired, Shirley. Please, I am in so much pain." Shirley's harsh expression faltered for a fraction of a second, replaced by a gleam of predatory triumph. She took a step closer, smelling victory. I raised my shaking hands covering my face as I let out a loud, wretched sob. "He took all the money," I cried, my words tumbling out in a frantic, broken stream. "My credit cards are declining. The hospital billing department was just here. I do not have a single dollar to my name. I cannot afford a lawyer. I cannot fight him." Carmen stared at me from the doorway, her eyes wide with sudden confusion. She took a half step forward, her protective instincts flaring, but she stopped when she saw the brief, sharp look I shot her through my tears. Carmen was sharp. She instantly understood I was running a play. She crossed her arms and remained silent, watching the performance unfold. $20,000 is nothing, I pleaded, looking up at Shirley with wide, desperate eyes. "It will not even cover my medical deductibles. I am going to lose my house. Where am I supposed to go?" "You should have thought about that before you alienated my son," Shirley sneered, her confidence fully restored. "$20,000 is more than you deserve. Sign the paper, Loretta. It is the only lifeline you are going to get." I grabbed the pen she offered, my hand shaking violently enough to make the ink skip across the signature line. I did not sign my actual name. I scribbled an illegible, frantic scrawl that vaguely resembled a signature, a mark that would never hold up in a court of law, but was messy enough to satisfy her desperate need for submission. I pushed the folder back across the table, burying my face in my hands and letting out another loud, pathetic wail. "Just leave me alone," I sobbed. "Tell him he won. Just leave me alone." Shirley snatched the folder off the tray table, a sickening, victorious smile spreading across her face. She looked down at my shaking form with absolute disgust. Good choice, she muttered, turning on her heel. I will have Nathan's lawyer process this immediately. She marched out of the hospital room, her expensive heels clicking triumphantly down the hallway, leaving the door wide open behind her. The moment her footsteps faded, the heavy, manufactured sobs stopped instantly. I lowered my hands from my face, wiping away the tears with a swift, steady motion. My breathing leveled out, returning to a calm, controlled rhythm. Carmen walked over and quietly shut the door, turning the deadbolt. She leaned against the wood, staring at me with a mixture of awe and mild terror. "What was that?" she asked, her voice hushed. "That was a distraction," I replied, picking up the tablet and my smartphone from the bed. I unlocked my phone, navigating to the synchronized messaging application that linked directly to Nathan's devices. I watched the screen intently. Less than 2 minutes later, a new text message popped up on the display. It was from Shirley, sent directly to Nathan. I got the signature. "She is completely broken, Nathan. Hysterics, crying, begging for the settlement money. She has nothing left. You won." I read Nathan's immediate reply, a simple, arrogant thumbs-up emoji. A cold, genuine smile touched the corners of my mouth. Nathan believed he had utterly destroyed me. He believed I was a shattered, penniless woman crying in a hospital bed, entirely neutralized and ready to surrender my child. His ego was so massive, so easily stroked by his mother's report, that he would completely abandon his defensive posture. He would not check his corporate servers. He would not monitor his offshore accounts. He would simply celebrate his impending wealth and his new tropical life with his mistress. He was a man walking proudly toward a precipice, entirely unaware that the bridge had already collapsed. I turned back to my tablet, reopening the encrypted folder containing the undeniable proof of his federal wire fraud. The red herring had worked perfectly. I had bought myself the crucial hours I needed to initiate the financial counterstrike. The trap was set. The target was complacent, and it was time to lock the cage. The sharp click of the deadbolt sliding into place echoed through the quiet hospital room, sealing out the hostile world my mother-in-law had just dragged into my sanctuary. I sat alone, the adrenaline from my manufactured breakdown slowly ebbing, leaving a cold, razor-sharp clarity in its wake. Nathan believed he had won. His mother's triumphant text message celebrating my supposed surrender was the digital equivalent of an enemy lowering their shields. He was currently celebrating a victory he had not earned, blinded by his own towering ego and the deceptive comfort of the false narrative I had just spoon-fed his family. It was time to dismantle his financial fortress. I picked up my smartphone and dialed a number I had saved weeks ago, a contact secured through back-channel whispers among the female executives in the Detroit supply chain network. The number belonged to Valerie. She was a legendary family law attorney headquartered in Grand Rapids, a woman whose reputation was built on systematically destroying men who believed their wealth made them untouchable. Valerie did not negotiate settlements. She orchestrated financial executions. She answered on the first ring, her voice crisp and commanding, devoid of the patronizing sympathy most lawyers offer frantic wives. I did not offer tears or emotional backstories. I spoke in the language of logistics and corporate warfare. I outlined the drained accounts, the fraudulent shell companies, the medical proxy trap, and the offshore escrow account Nathan was using to funnel the stolen $150,000. Valerie listened intently, her silence on the line a testament to her calculated focus. When I finished, she let out a low, appreciative hum. "Your husband is remarkably stupid, Loretta," she stated, her tone sharp as a scalpel. "He has handed us a loaded weapon, but we need to move fast before he realizes the safety is off. I am filing the emergency financial injunctions immediately, but freezing an offshore escrow account from a hospital bed requires a specific leverage point." I smiled a genuine expression that did not reach my eyes. I have the leverage, Valerie, I replied smoothly. Let me tell you about a little blind trust called Apex Financial Solutions, LLC. To understand the beauty of the trap I was about to spring, one must understand Nathan's fundamental flaw. He was a man obsessed with the appearance of wealth, often prioritizing the facade over actual solvency. 2 years ago, desperate to fund a speculative logistics software startup that eventually crashed and burned, Nathan took out a massive secondary mortgage on our sprawling Michigan lake house. The property deed was solely in his name, a point he frequently wielded in arguments to remind me who owned our kingdom. When he began funneling his income into his extravagant affair with Taylor last spring, he quietly defaulted on that secondary loan. He missed 3 consecutive payments, pushing the debt to the brink of foreclosure. He hid the notices, terrified that his regional board would discover his financial insolvency and reconsider his impending promotion. He assumed the debt servicer, a massive, faceless conglomerate named Apex Financial Group, was simply bogged down at administrative backlog. He did not know that a seasoned supply chain director specializes in vendor acquisition and debt restructuring. Months ago, utilizing 3 years of accumulated corporate performance bonuses, I quietly established a blind trust in Delaware. I named the entity Apex Financial Solutions, LLC, a deliberate, almost identical twin to his original debt servicer. Through my attorney, I approached the original conglomerate and offered a quiet, full-cash buyout of Nathan's defaulted secondary mortgage. They gladly offloaded the toxic asset. I legally assumed the lien on the property. I became his bank. For the past 5 months, whenever Nathan scrambled to make a minimum payment to keep the foreclosure at bay, the funds were routed directly into a holding account controlled entirely by me. Because he never read the fine print on the updated loan servicer disclosures, blinded by the matching Apex moniker, he remained blissfully ignorant that his wife owned the debt on his entire life. I explained this complex financial maneuver to Valerie. I could practically hear the shark-like grin spreading across her face through the phone. "You are a dangerous woman, Loretta," she murmured, the respect in her voice palpable. "The terms of that defaulted loan grant the lien holder immediate seizure rights over any liquid assets the debtor attempts to transfer outside his primary accounts to satisfy the outstanding balance." "Exactly," I confirmed, my fingers flying across my tablet to pull up the encrypted banking ledgers. "Nathan is currently attempting to wire the stolen $150,000 from his temporary escrow account directly to a luxury real estate brokerage in Miami to secure a year-long lease on a beachfront penthouse. The wire transfer is scheduled to clear at noon today." Valerie did not miss a beat. "Send me the routing numbers and the loan default documentation right now. I am executing a hard freeze on that wire transfer and legally redirecting the entire sum directly into the Apex Financial Solutions Holding Trust. He is in default. We are seizing the collateral." I transferred the encrypted files and the digital packets flying through cyberspace, carrying the destruction of his tropical dream. We ended the call, the silence of the hospital room returning, but the atmosphere felt entirely different. It was no longer a cage. It was a command center. I watched the clock on the wall tick steadily toward noon. I imagined Nathan sitting in his pristine corner office, perhaps texting Taylor about the ocean views, eagerly waiting for the confirmation email from the Miami brokerage. He believed he was moments away from freedom. At exactly 12:03, the notification illuminated my tablet screen. The banking alert was sterile and precise. The wire transfer of $150,000, initiated by Nathan, had been intercepted and redirected pursuant to a lien holder seizure order executed by Apex Financial Solutions, LLC. The money was gone. Not merely frozen, but legally vacuumed into a vault he could not access, controlled by the very woman he believed was crying helplessly in a hospital bed. My smartphone vibrated violently against the plastic tray table. The screen displayed Nathan's name, the caller identification, flashing with desperate urgency. He was not calling to check on my recovery or inquire about our premature son. He was calling because his bank had just informed him that his escape fund had vanished into thin air. I did not answer. I watched the screen go dark, savoring the profound, suffocating panic I knew was gripping his chest. His primary accounts were drained, his credit cards were canceled, and his stolen cash was locked behind an impenetrable legal wall. He was entirely broke, stranded in a freezing Michigan winter, and his carefully constructed reality was beginning to fracture. But a narcissist stripped of his resources does not surrender. He lashes out, seeking a scapegoat. I knew exactly where Nathan would direct his fury. He would not suspect me, the broken, hysterical wife. He would suspect the young, naive junior accounts manager whose name was plastered across the fraudulent shell companies holding the rest of his embezzled corporate funds. The financial strike was successful, but the true brilliance of supply chain management is knowing how to manipulate the hostile vendors against each other. Nathan was about to turn on Taylor, and I was fully prepared to catch her when she fell. The digital breadcrumbs I had gathered earlier were about to become leverage, and the mistress was about to become the star witness for the prosecution. The silence following the blocked wire transfer was not peaceful. It was pregnant with impending chaos. Nathan was broke, panicked, and cornered. My tablet, still connected to his corporate administrative account, became a digital periscope into his unraveling world. I monitored the internal communication logs, watching a frantic flurry of messages bounce between his personal device and the corporate servers. He was scrambling, desperately trying to unfreeze the offshore funds he believed were blocked by a simple banking glitch. While he panicked over the missing money, I dove deeper into the encrypted cache I had downloaded from his drive. The financial ledgers prove the wire fraud, and the geotagged photos confirm the affair. I had the smoking gun to destroy his career and his freedom. But a supply chain director knows that a successful audit requires examining all the variables, including the external vendors. I needed to understand Taylor's exact role in this operation. Was she merely a naive participant seduced by expensive dinners? Or was she an active conspirator in the corporate theft? I opened a separate folder labeled Personal Communications Backup. It contained a comprehensive archive of text messages and emails, meticulously categorized by contact. Nathan, ever the obsessive record keeper, had backed up everything, perhaps believing he might need leverage later. I located the thread belonging to Taylor. Scrolling past the predictable romantic exchanges and the discussions about luxury Miami rentals, I found a cluster of messages dated 3 weeks ago, shortly before I signed the deceptive medical proxy. The tone of the conversation shifted abruptly from affectionate banter to cold, calculated strategy. I leaned closer to the screen, my eyes scanning the text. The words struck me with the force of a physical blow. The horrifying truth emerged, not from my husband's keyboard, but from his mistress's. Taylor wrote, "You need to expedite this, Nathan. If she finds out about the missing money before the regional rollout, your board will panic. You said she is stressed and her blood pressure is high. Use it." Nathan replied, "My lawyer says proving unfitness is difficult in a no-fault state without a documented history." Taylor's response was swift and chilling. "Then create the history. Postpartum psychosis is a real diagnosis. Women break under pressure all the time, especially older mothers with demanding careers. Tell your lawyer to draft an emergency order, get her heavily medicated after the birth, and have the papers served while she is delirious. If you secure sole custody, you eliminate the child support liability entirely. We need that capital for the penthouse lease." My breath caught in my throat. The room spun for a fraction of a second. Taylor was not just a passive accessory. She was the architect of my intended destruction. She, a 24-year-old junior accounts manager who had smiled at me over cocktails at a holiday party, had actively engineered a plot to have me declared legally insane, strip me of my newborn son, and leave me destitute. all to secure funding for her tropical fantasy. The cold fury that had been simmering within me crystallized into something far more dangerous. It was no longer just about recovering stolen funds or neutralizing a cheating husband. It was about absolute, surgical retaliation against every single node in his corrupt network. I looked at the clock on the wall. It was nearing 1 in the afternoon. Nathan was undoubtedly pacing his office, screaming at customer service representatives regarding the frozen wire transfer. He was distracted, volatile, and vulnerable. This was the perfect moment to sever his most critical supply line. I picked up my smartphone and dialed the direct extension for Taylor's desk at the logistics software firm. I knew the number by heart. I had dialed it several times in the past to coordinate vendor meetings. She answered on the third ring. "Good afternoon, corporate accounts, Taylor speaking." Her voice, bright, polished, and perfectly professional. I did not offer a polite greeting. I did not introduce myself with tears or accusations. I bypassed the role of the scorned wife entirely and adopted the terrifying, unyielding authority of a senior executive executing a hostile takeover. "Taylor, this is Loretta Diaz," I stated, my tone flat, precise, and devoid of any warmth. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line, followed by a long, heavy silence. The polished professional facade instantly crumbled. "Mrs. Diaz," she stammered, her voice suddenly tight and thin. How can I help you?" I did not allow her the courtesy of recovering her composure. "I am calling to inform you of a significant discrepancy in the regional routing algorithms handled by your department," I said, maintaining the steady cadence of a corporate audit. Specifically, the phantom fuel tariffs inflating the Midwest transit invoices. "I have been reviewing the outflow ledgers, Taylor. I see the money." The silence on the line stretched out thick with sudden, suffocating panic. She tried to speak, but only a small, choked sound escaped her throat. I pressed the advantage, driving the wedge deeper. "I also see where the money is going," I continued smoothly. "Apex Logistics Solutions, Horizon Freight Partners, Midwest Transit Incorporated, 3 anonymous limited liability companies registered in Delaware." I paused, letting the names of her fraudulent shell companies hang in the air. "Nathan is currently experiencing a severe liquidity crisis," I informed her. "The $150,000 he attempted to wire to the Miami brokerage this morning has been permanently seized by a senior lien holder due to a defaulted loan. He is entirely broke, Taylor. The penthouse is gone." "No," she whispered, the denial frantic and breathless. That cannot be right. He said the transfer was approved." "He lied to you," I replied, my voice cutting through her panic like a razor. "Just like he is lying about his legal strategy. The federal authorities will be notified of the wire fraud by tomorrow morning. I have compiled the raw data, the internal routing codes, and the offshore transfer receipts." I let the threat of federal involvement settle over her. She was young, ambitious, and entirely out of her depth in a game of high-stakes corporate embezzlement. "When the Federal Bureau of Investigation audits those shell companies, Taylor, whose name do you think they will find on the registry documents?" I asked softly. "Nathan is a vice president. He understands plausible deniability. He hard-coded the backdoor algorithm, but he ensured the stolen funds landed in accounts registered to a junior accounts manager. You are the sole signatory. When the indictment comes down, his defense strategy is already prepared. He will claim you orchestrated the entire skim to fund a lavish lifestyle, and he was merely an unwitting victim of your manipulation." "That is not true," she cried, her voice cracking, the sheer terror finally breaking through. "He set them up. He told me to sign the paperwork. He said it was a standard tax shelter for his executive bonus. I did not know he was stealing from the clients." "Ignorance is not a valid defense for interstate wire fraud," I reminded her coldly. "The federal prosecutor will look at the paper trail. The paper trail points directly to your apartment downtown. You are looking at a minimum of 10 years in a federal penitentiary. Please, she begged, the sound of her frantic breathing filling the earpiece. Please, Mrs. Diaz, you have to believe me. I did not want any part of this. Then prove it, I commanded, springing the trap. I knew Nathan kept a secondary, highly encrypted ledger detailing the exact distribution of the stolen funds. It was the master key, the definitive proof, tying his executive access directly to the fraudulent tariffs. I could not access it through the standard administrative portal. I needed an internal asset to bypass the physical security protocols. I need the final encrypted ledgers from his personal workstation, I told her. The master routing logs. If you provide them, if you give me the irrefutable evidence proving his sole culpability, I will ensure your cooperation is noted when I submit the forensic dossier to the corporate board. If you refuse, I include your text messages suggesting my institutionalization, and I let the federal prosecutors bury you. I will send them, she gasped, without a second of hesitation. He is in a meeting with the CEO right now trying to explain a discrepancy with his corporate credit card. His laptop is unlocked on his desk. I can get the files right now. Do it, I said. Send them to my secure server. And Taylor? Yes, she whispered, terrified. Pack your desk, I advised. Your career in logistics over. I ended the call staring at the blank screen of my phone. The mistress had been successfully flipped. The most critical supply line was severed, and the final, devastating piece of evidence was en route. Nathan was completely isolated, surrounded by enemies he did not yet know existed, and his destruction was imminent. The progress bar on my tablet vanished, replaced by a green checkmark indicating a successful transfer. Taylor had kept her word. The final encrypted ledgers from Nathan's personal workstation now rested securely within my digital dossier. The master routing logs were the undeniable proof required by the federal authorities. The corporate theft was no longer a theory, it was a documented reality. I merged the new files into the comprehensive audit, saving the finished portfolio to an external secure server. The trap was fully loaded. My smartphone vibrated on the tray table, emitting a harsh, buzzing sound that cut through the quiet hum of the medical monitors. I glanced at the screen, expecting an update from my sister down the hall. Instead, Nathan's name illuminated the display. He was not calling, he had sent a single text message. Enjoy the streets. I changed the locks on the lake house. I stared at the harsh black letters. A man cornered by his own financial ruin will always try to assert dominance in the only arena he believes he still controls. He could not access his offshore escrow account, so he sought to punish me by attacking our shared shelter. He intended to render a recovering surgical patient and a premature infant homeless during a brutal Michigan winter. He thought this cruel gesture would force me to beg to crawl back to him and sign away my maternal rights just to keep a roof over my head. He was operating under the delusion of ownership. He forgot who held the deed to his debt. I tapped the contact icon for Valerie, my family law attorney in Grand Rapids. She answered instantly, the ambient noise of a busy law firm echoing in the background. I read Nathan's text message aloud. Valerie let out a low, satisfied hum. He is remarkably predictable, she noted, the sound of keyboard clacking bleeding through the speaker. The judge signed the emergency injunction 10 minutes ago, Loretta. Apex Financial Solutions is now the legal possessor of the property due to his loan default. The county sheriff's department has the paperwork. They dispatched 2 patrol cars to your address a few moments ago to enforce the lien. I thanked her and ended the call. I did not need to imagine the scene unfolding miles away. I had installed a high-definition smart doorbell camera on our front porch last year to monitor package deliveries. I opened the application on my phone and selected the live video feed. The screen buffered for a second before displaying crisp color video. The Michigan snowstorm was relentless, driving thick, white flakes sideways across the porch. Standing near the front door was a hired locksmith, kneeling beside his heavy metal toolbox, drilling into the brass deadbolt I had picked out 3 years ago. Pacing right behind him was Nathan. He wore his expensive tailored wool overcoat, the collar turned up against the biting wind. He blew warm air into his cupped hands, shifting his weight from foot to ward off the freezing temperature. Even through the digital distortion of the camera microphone, I could hear him barking impatient orders at the working man. "Hurry it up," Nathan snapped, checking his designer watch. "I have a major corporate presentation tomorrow morning, and I need to be inside where it is warm. Make sure you leave all 3 spare keys on the kitchen counter. I do not want anyone else having access to this property." The sheer dramatic irony of the moment tasted like fine wine. Nathan stood on the porch of $1 million home, boasting about a corporate promotion he was never going to receive, attempting to secure a house he no longer legally possessed. He was a king, issuing decrees from a collapsing throne. The locksmith pulled the old cylinder from the wooden doorframe, tossing it into his toolbox. Before he could install the new hardware, a wash of bright, strobing red and blue lights reflected off the fresh snow lining the driveway. Nathan stopped pacing. He turned toward the street, a look of mild annoyance crossing his features. Through the camera feed, I watched 2 marked county sheriff cruisers slide into the driveway, blocking Nathan's luxury sedan. 4 uniformed officers stepped out into the blizzard, the heavy crunch of their boots echoing over the audio feed. Nathan straightened his posture, adopting the smooth, confident persona he reserved for authority figures and wealthy clients. He likely assumed the officers were responding to a neighborhood noise complaint or a weather-related traffic hazard. He walked toward the top of the porch steps to greet them, raising a hand in a casual salute. "Evening, officers," Nathan called out, projecting his deep sales voice over the howling wind. "Everything all right out here?" The lead deputy, a tall man with a stern expression visible beneath his winter cap, did not return the greeting. He marched up the steps, his hand resting near his utility belt, and turned his attention to the kneeling tradesman. "Step away from the door, sir," the deputy ordered the locksmith, his tone firm and unyielding. "Put your tools down." Nathan frowned, stepping between the deputy and the front door. "Excuse me, officer, but I hired him. I am the homeowner. I am having the locks changed. There is no problem here." The deputy pulled a folded stack of yellow legal documents from his thick winter jacket. He uncreased the papers, holding them up in the dim porch light. "Are you Nathan Diaz?" the deputy asked. "Yes," Nathan replied, his voice losing a fraction of its arrogant edge. "This is my house. My name is on the deed." "Not anymore, sir," the deputy stated, handing the heavy stack of paperwork directly to my husband. "We are serving a court-ordered emergency eviction and property seizure notice on behalf of the senior lien holder, Apex Financial Solutions. You are in severe default of your secondary loan terms. By attempting to alter the property hardware without authorization from the lien holder, you triggered an immediate forfeiture clause." Nathan stared at the yellow papers, the color rapidly draining from his face. The cold wind whipped his perfectly styled hair into a disheveled mess. He looked down at the documents, then back up at the officers, his brain struggling to comprehend the legal jargon. "This is a mistake," Nathan stammered, his confident facade shattering into a million jagged pieces. "Apex is just my debt servicer. They cannot evict me without months of notice. My lawyer told me I had time. You have the wrong information. Let me go inside and call my attorney." The deputy stepped forward, using his physical presence to block Nathan from the open doorway. "The judge signed the injunction an hour ago, Mr. Diaz. The property now legally belongs to the holding trust. You are currently trespassing. We need you to vacate the premises immediately." The locksmith, sensing the legal danger and wanting no part in a foreclosure dispute, swiftly gathered his tools. He did not ask Nathan for payment. He scurried down the porch steps, threw his heavy metal box into his work van, and drove away into the snowy night, leaving the front door lock half dismantled. Nathan was frozen a statue of pure disbelief. "But I live here," he protested, his voice cracking, rising to a desperate pitch. "All my suits are in there. My presentation materials are on my desk. I have a regional rollout pitch tomorrow. I cannot be out here in the snow. I do not have anywhere else to go." "You have exactly 5 minutes to get into your vehicle and leave the subdivision," the deputy warned. Ignoring his frantic pleading, "If you attempt to enter the structure, you will be arrested for breaking and entering." I watched through the digital lens as Nathan looked around the empty, freezing yard. His shoulders slumped. The reality of his sudden homelessness crashed down upon him, a crushing weight that left him shivering in his expensive coat. The man who had thrown a crumpled bill at his pregnant wife, telling her to take an Uber to the hospital, was now standing in a blizzard, with no shelter, no access to his wealth, and no understanding of how his kingdom had vanished beneath his feet. I tapped the screen, closing the live video application. The silence of the hospital room felt profoundly satisfying. The physical and financial retaliations were complete, yet the ultimate reckoning remained. The sun would rise in a few hours, bringing the morning of his highly anticipated regional rollout pitch. He thought losing his house was the worst thing that could happen to him. He was about to learn that a supply chain director never leaves a job unfinished. The harsh winter dawn breached the horizon, casting a stark, pale glare across the frosted glass of my hospital window. The Detroit skyline emerged from the blizzard, a jagged silhouette of steel and glass, standing resolute against the freezing wind. I sat propped against the stiff recovery ward pillows, ignoring the persistent, dull throbbing near my surgical staples. The physical pain was a distant background static, entirely overshadowed by the sharp, crystalline focus occupying my mind. My laptop rested on the rolling tray table, the screen displaying the culmination of my overnight labor. It was a 60-page digital dossier, a pristine, undeniable masterpiece of forensic accounting. I reviewed the table of contents one final time. The document was structured with the meticulous precision of a supply chain audit. Section 1 detailed the systematic theft of corporate expense funds, cross-referencing his fraudulent client dinner receipts with Taylor's geotagged social media photographs. Section 2 exposed the hidden backdoor algorithm hard-coded into the regional logistics software, explaining exactly how the phantom fuel tariffs were generated to overcharge major automotive clients. Section 3 provided the offshore routing numbers and the state registry filings for the shell companies, linking the stolen revenue directly to his junior accounts manager. It was a blueprint for a federal indictment. The time was 8:45 in the morning. Miles away in a sprawling glass high-rise overlooking the frozen river, the regional board of directors was assembling. Nathan's logistics firm commanded premium office space. I could easily picture the scene. The executives would be taking their seats around a polished mahogany table, pouring dark roasted coffee, adjusting their silk ties. At the head of the table would sit Donovan, the chief executive officer, a man who built his empire on client trust and transparent freight practices. And standing at the front of that room, clutching a digital presentation remote, would be my husband. Nathan's reality had fractured the night before. Evicted from his own home, locked out of his stolen escrow funds, he likely spent the freezing night sleeping in the driver's seat of his luxury sedan or pacing the floor of a cheap roadside motel. His custom suit would be slightly wrinkled. His eyes would carry the heavy bloodshot burden of panic and sleep deprivation. Yet knowing his towering narcissism, I knew he would try to push through. He would rely on his charisma, hoping this regional rollout pitch would secure his promotion, granting him the corporate leverage and the executive bonus he desperately needed to salvage his ruined escape plan. He believed this presentation was his lifeline. I opened my secure email client. In the recipient field, I typed Donovan's direct address, followed by the contact information for every senior member of the corporate board. Finally, I added the official submission address for the Regional Enforcement Division of the Securities and Exchange Commission. The subject line was devoid of any emotion, reading simply internal audit and notification of federal wire fraud. I watched the digital clock on the wall. At 9 o'clock, Donovan would call the meeting to order. At 9:05, Nathan would begin speaking, launching into his rehearsed corporate jargon, projecting false confidence, while his world burned around him. I waited until the second hand swept past the 12, marking exactly 9:10. I pressed the return key. The email vanished from my outbox, launching into cyberspace with silent, lethal intent. I did not close my laptop. Thanks to the temporary encrypted tunnel established by the young IT technician the night before, I maintained a passive connection to the firm's administrative directory. I could not see the boardroom, but a supply chain director does not need eyes to monitor a process. I could read the network logs. I watched the digital traffic translating the server data into a vivid picture of the execution. In the boardroom, Nathan would be clicking his remote, displaying colorful charts detailing projected freight corridors and quarterly revenue expansions. He would be gesturing confidently, entirely unaware that the woman he dismissed as a glorified box counter was currently directing the traffic of his destruction. On my screen, the server logs suddenly spiked. An emergency high-level security protocol initiated directly from the chief executive's office terminal. Donovan had opened the email. I envisioned the CEO reading the executive summary on his tablet. The realization would hit him like a physical strike. His rising star, the man pitching a regional expansion, was actively siphoning millions from their most lucrative automotive accounts, jeopardizing the firm's entire reputation. The irrefutable proof was right there in black and white. The phantom tariffs, the offshore transfers, the shell companies. The digital dominoes fell across my screen with beautiful, flawless synchronization. The corporate IT department, undoubtedly responding to a frantic phone call from Donovan, executed a system-wide lockdown on Nathan's credentials. His Active Directory profile flashed red. His email account was suspended. His server access was permanently severed. In the boardroom, the projector casting Nathan's pristine presentation would suddenly go dark, displaying a harsh blue screen indicating a lost network connection. Nathan would tap his remote, offering a polished joke about technical difficulties, attempting to smooth over the awkward silence. But the silence would not break. Donovan would stand up, raising a hand to command the room's attention. The CEO would not mince words. He would inform the assembled board that they had just received a comprehensive whistleblower report detailing extensive corporate embezzlement and federal wire fraud. He would state the names of the shell companies. He would mention the backdoor algorithm. Nathan's charismatic veneer would shatter instantly. The panic he had tried to suppress all night would rise, choking the air from his lungs. He would look around the mahogany table, seeing the faces of his mentors and colleagues harden into masks of granite disgust. The promotion he coveted was gone. His career was ash. The server logs showed a new entry. Corporate security had been summoned to the executive floor. Donovan would publicly terminate Nathan for extreme misconduct right there in front of the board. He would instruct the security personnel to detain him in a secure holding office, ensuring he could not access any sensitive hardware or destroy any physical documents, while the firm's legal counsel contacted the federal authorities. The executives he had sought to impress would watch him being marched out, a disgraced thief, stripped of his title and his dignity. I logged out of the network, closing the virtual private network connection. The screen returned to my standard desktop background. The corporate execution was a resounding success. I leaned back against the pillows, closing my eyes and exhaling a long, slow breath. The relief was profound, but it was not the end. A cornered predator stripped of its territory is the most dangerous kind of threat. Nathan had lost his house, his stolen cash, and his career. He was facing a federal indictment that carried a decade of prison time. He was completely out of options, which meant he would reach for his final, desperate lifeline. He still believed he held one ultimate trump card. the temporary medical and financial proxy. He would realize the corporate walls were closing in, and he would need immediate leverage to shield himself from the impending fallout. He would assume that if he secured full physical and legal custody of Mateo, he could force me to withdraw the evidence or, at least, extort a settlement to fund a criminal defense attorney. He would bolt from that office building before the federal agents arrived. He would call his aggressive family law attorney Gordon Hale and demand they execute the ex parte motion immediately. He would head straight for this hospital, intending to bypass security, burst into my recovery room, and use my surgical state to declare me psychologically unfit. He planned to rip my newborn son from my arms and use him as a human shield against his own crimes. I opened my eyes, the cold resolve hardening my features. I pressed the call button to summon my sister Carmen back into the room. The digital war was over, but the final physical confrontation was rapidly approaching. Nathan was coming to claim a child he did not love, and I was ready to show him exactly what happens when you underestimate a mother defending her own. The morning light streaming through the hospital window shifted from a harsh glare to a steady, revealing beam. I knew Nathan was coming. A man whose entire identity is built on control will always sprint toward the last remaining source of leverage when his foundation crumbles. He had lost his career, his offshore funds, and his real estate. The only asset he believed he still possessed was the biological link to my newborn son. He intended to use Mateo as a hostage to negotiate his survival. I refused to receive him looking like a victim. I pressed the control button on the side of my mattress, raising the upper half of the bed until I was sitting perfectly upright. The movement pulled fiercely at my surgical staples, but I forced my expression to remain serene. Carmen stood by my side, helping me remove the standard-issue hospital gown. I changed into a crisp, dark silk robe I had packed in my overnight bag. I brushed my hair, pulling it back into a tight, immaculate knot at the nape of my neck. I applied a thin layer of tinted moisturizer and a swipe of dark lipstick. I did not look like a woman suffering from severe postpartum psychosis. I looked like a chief executive officer preparing to terminate a hostile contractor. Valerie, my family law attorney, arrived exactly on schedule. She strode into the recovery room wearing a tailored charcoal suit, carrying a sleek leather briefcase. She exuded an aura of predatory calm. We reviewed the final countermeasure. The trap was primed. We only had to wait for the target to step onto the pressure plate. The wait was brief. The heavy wooden door of the maternity ward did not just open, it flew inward, striking the rubber wall stopper with a sharp, resonant thud. Nathan stood in the threshold, breathing heavily. The transformation in his appearance was staggering. The polished, charismatic vice president of regional sales was gone. In his place stood a frantic, disheveled shadow of a man. His expensive custom suit was deeply wrinkled, the fabric clinging awkwardly to his tense frame. His silk tie hung loose around his unbuttoned collar. His hair, usually styled with immaculate precision, stuck up in erratic tufts. He smelled strongly of stale coffee, cold winter sweat, and pure, unfiltered panic. Flanking him was Gordon Hale, the sleazy attorney who had drafted the exit strategy. Gordon looked equally tense, his eyes darting around the room, assessing the threat level. He clutched a thick stack of manila folders against his chest, undoubtedly containing the emergency ex parte motion and the custody waiver they intended to force upon me. Nathan stepped into the room, his bloodshot eyes scanning the space. He ignored my sister Carmen, standing near the window. He ignored Valerie, sitting quietly in the corner chair. His frantic gaze locked onto me, sitting upright in the bed, projecting an aura of total unbothered composure. His brain struggled to process the visual discrepancy. He expected to find a heavily medicated, weeping woman, broken by the physical trauma of an emergency delivery and the psychological weight of his orchestrated abandonment. Finding me immaculate and poised, caused a visible glitch in his cognitive processing. "Where is he?" Nathan demanded, his voice hoarse and trembling with a mixture of rage and desperation. He marched toward the foot of my bed, gripping the metal railing so tightly his knuckles turned stark white. He needed this victory. He needed to secure the child, to regain a foothold in his collapsing reality. Gordon Hale stepped forward, clearing his throat to project a false sense of legal authority. "Mrs. Diaz, we are here to execute a temporary medical and financial proxy, citing your current physical incapacitation and documented psychological instability. Furthermore, we have an emergency custody waiver requiring your immediate signature." Gordon slapped the manila folders onto my rolling tray table. The heavy paper landed with a dull smack. "Sign the papers," Loretta Nathan hissed, leaning over the metal railing, attempting to use his physical presence to intimidate me. "The firm just suspended my network access. There was some kind of massive glitch with the regional servers, and I do not have time to deal with your stubbornness today. I need to get back to the office and fix my accounts. Give me the baby right now. You are in no condition to care for him. Sign the waiver, and I will make sure you get a small settlement to cover your hospital bills. If you fight me, I swear I will leave you nothing." He was still lying. He knew he was fired. He knew his career was ash. He was trying to bluff his way through a losing hand, hoping I was ignorant of the federal audit tearing through his corporate boardroom. I looked down at the custody waiver resting on the plastic tray. I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice. I looked back up, meeting his bloodshot, terrified eyes. I let a cold, chilling smile spread across my face. "What baby, Nathan?" I asked. The words hung in the sterile air, freezing the room into a tableau of stunned silence. Nathan blinked, his mouth dropping open slightly. His exhausted brain could not comprehend the question. "What are you talking about?" he stammered, pointing a shaking finger toward the empty, clear plastic bassinet resting in the corner of the room. "My son, the baby you just delivered. Stop playing games and tell me where the nurses took him." I did not answer him. I simply shifted my gaze toward the corner chair, yielding the floor to my legal counsel. Valerie stood up smoothly, buttoning her charcoal blazer. She walked toward the center of the room, positioning herself directly between Nathan and my hospital bed. She did not raise her voice, but her tone carried the lethal, undeniable weight of a seasoned litigator executing a flawless checkmate. "Mr. Diaz, my name is Valerie, and I represent your wife in all current and future legal proceedings," she stated, her eyes locking onto Gordon Hale. "And you, counselor, are currently attempting to enforce a fraudulent document." Gordon puffed out his chest, trying to maintain his bluster. "That proxy is legally binding. Your client signed it willingly 3 weeks ago to shield her husband's assets from medical liability." "That is exactly the point," Valerie replied, a sharp, predatory grin touching her lips. She reached into her sleek briefcase and produced a certified, watermarked copy of the exact document Nathan had bullied me into signing. Valerie held the paper up, pointing to a specific clause buried deep within the dense legal jargon. To protect his upcoming executive bonus from potential neonatal intensive care unit bills, your client added a very specific addendum to this proxy after my client signed it. He committed document forgery. But more importantly, let us examine the text he foolishly inserted. Valerie read the clause aloud, her enunciation crisp and punishing. "In the event of catastrophic medical intervention regarding the unborn dependent, the proxy holder explicitly disavows any and all financial responsibility, medical liability, and presumed legal guardianship, categorizing himself as a non-liable third party to shield the primary estate." The color rapidly drained from Nathan's face. He stumbled backward, hitting the edge of the visitor chair. Valerie lowered the document, staring at the sleazy attorney who was suddenly sweating profusely. By preemptively declaring himself a non-liable third party and explicitly disavowing presumed legal guardianship of the unborn child to protect his own wealth, Mr. Diaz legally severed his immediate parental rights. He essentially signed a preemptive relinquishment of paternity. That is an administrative shield, Gordon protested weakly, his voice cracking under the pressure. It does not terminate biological rights. It does when it is combined with a sworn affidavit detailing physical abandonment during a medical crisis, a fraudulent diagnosis of psychological instability, and the documented theft of marital funds. Valerie countered flawlessly. I filed the counterpetition with the family court at dawn. The judge reviewed your forged proxy addendum and recognized it for exactly what it is: a legal declaration of abandonment. Valerie pulled a second document from her briefcase, a heavy sheet of paper bearing the golden seal of the state court. The judge granted our emergency injunction, she announced, handing the paper directly to Gordon Hale. Nathan Diaz possesses zero legal standing regarding the minor child. He has no physical custody rights. He has no visitation rights. He is legally recognized as a hostile third party. Gordon stared at the court order, his eyes widening in sheer terror as he realized the depth of the trap they had walked into. He looked at Nathan, then back at Valerie, recognizing he was standing on the wrong side of a legal slaughter. Without uttering a single word of defense, Gordon dropped his manila folders onto the floor, turned on his heel, and fast-walked out of the hospital room, abandoning his client to save his own bar license. Nathan was left standing alone in the center of the room. The realization of his total defeat crashed over him. He had tried to use the law to steal my son, and the law had turned around and erased him entirely. He had no leverage. He had no hostage. He had nothing. He looked at me, his eyes filling with a pathetic, desperate realization. "Loretta, please," he whispered, his voice breaking. But the showdown was not over. The legal checkmate was merely the opening act for the final reckoning, and the footsteps echoing down the hallway signaled that his ultimate punishment had finally arrived. Gordon Hale's frantic footsteps faded down the sterile corridor, a cowardly retreat echoing the collapse of Nathan's legal siege. My husband stood rooted to the linoleum floor, a captain going down with a ship he had intentionally sabotaged. His shoulders, usually pulled back in a posture of relentless confidence, slumped forward. The tailored fabric of his expensive charcoal suit wrinkled around his chest, suddenly looking like a cheap costume, borrowed for a play he forgot the lines to. He stared at the empty space where his lawyer had just stood, his mind scrambling to calculate a new route out of the corner he had painted himself into. The realization that he possessed zero legal standing regarding our newborn son hit him in visible waves. He turned his bloodshot eyes back to me. The venom and bluster had evaporated, replaced by a desperate, hollow bargaining tactic. "Loretta, listen to me," he started, his voice adopting the slick, persuasive cadence he used on hesitant software clients. "We do not need attorneys. We can handle this internally. I know you are angry about the bank accounts, but I can fix the transfers. I will give you the lake house. Just tell Valerie to drop the injunctions. We are a family." I watched him attempt to negotiate his survival, marveling at the sheer depth of his delusion. He truly believed he could talk his way out of a burning building. He did not realize the smoke he smelled was his own career turning to ash. I remained silent, letting him drown in the quiet of the recovery room. Valerie snapped her sleek briefcase shut, the brass latches clicking with an air of profound finality. She offered Nathan a look of clinical detachment, the kind a scientist reserves for a particularly uninteresting specimen. My sister Carmen, standing near the window, let out a low, humorless chuckle. Her protective instincts, usually dialed to a fever pitch, had settled into a calm, watchful posture. She knew the battle was over. The fortress was secure. Before Nathan could launch into another pathetic promise, the heavy wooden doors of the maternity ward swung open for the final time. The entrance was not a frantic burst, but a measured, synchronized movement that commanded instant obedience. 3 individuals stepped into the room. They did not wear scrubs or carry medical charts. They wore dark, nondescript windbreakers, their postures rigid with undeniable authority. Clipped to their belts were the unmistakable gold shields of federal agents. The air in the room shifted, growing thick with the sudden, crushing weight of systemic justice. The lead agent, a tall woman with sharp features and a no-nonsense gaze, stepped past the threshold. Her eyes swept the room, assessing the occupants before locking onto my husband. "Nathan Diaz," she asked, her tone devoid of inflection, a flat statement rather than a genuine question. Nathan froze. The slick salesman died right there on the spot. His mouth opened, but only a ragged, breathless wheeze escaped. He took a half-step backward, his polished leather shoes squeaking against the tile. "We are with the Federal Bureau of Investigation," the lead agent stated, stepping fully into the space. "You are being placed under arrest." The words hung in the air, a definitive period at the end of his arrogant sentence. The agent did not raise her voice, but the enunciation was punishing. "We are executing warrants for extensive corporate embezzlement, interstate wire fraud, and the creation of fraudulent shell entities," she continued, her voice slicing through the sterile air. "Your employer's corporate board submitted a comprehensive forensic dossier to our regional office this morning. It details the phantom fuel tariffs you hard-coded into the regional logistics software, as well as the offshore routing numbers tied to Apex Logistics Solutions and Horizon Freight Partners. Furthermore, we have secured a sworn confession from your junior accounts manager, Taylor. She provided the encrypted master ledgers from your personal workstation. Your accounts are frozen, and your network credentials have been seized." The remaining color vanished from Nathan's face. The reality of his total destruction finally crashed down upon him. He had lost his real estate. He had lost his pristine reputation. His mistress had turned state's evidence, and now he was losing his physical freedom. His knees, trembling beneath his wool trousers, gave out entirely. He slumped downward, catching himself on the edge of the visitor chair. The 2 assisting agents moved forward with fluid precision, grabbing him by the arms and hauling him back to his feet. They spun him around, pressing his chest against the wall near the doorway. "Hands behind your back," one agent commanded. Nathan struggled weakly, his movements sluggish and uncoordinated, driven by pure terror rather than actual resistance. The metallic, rhythmic clicking of heavy steel handcuffs ratcheting around his wrists echoed sharply through the quiet recovery room. It was the most beautiful sound I had heard all morning, a mechanical melody of pure accountability. As the cold steel locked into place, Nathan turned his head, looking over his shoulder. The mask was gone. He was a cornered animal, terrified and broken. Tears welled in his eyes, spilling over his lashes and tracking down his pale cheeks, ruining his expensive cologne. "Loretta, please," he begged, his voice cracking into a high-pitched, desperate sob. "Tell them it is a mistake. Tell them you made up the accounting file. You know the CEO. You can call Donovan, please. I am your husband. You have to help me. I have nowhere else to go. I will do anything." I looked down at the man who had treated me like a disposable object for 4 years. I looked at the man who planned to use our fragile, premature son as a human shield against his own greed. I searched my soul for a single ounce of pity, a shred of remorse for the devastation I had brought upon him. I found nothing. My heart beat with a slow, steady rhythm. The supply chain director had successfully quarantined the toxic asset. I shifted my weight, leaning forward slightly, against the stiff hospital pillows. I reached toward the small plastic bedside drawer attached to my tray table. Earlier that morning, when I changed into my silk robe, I had transferred a specific item from the pockets of my soaked sweatpants. I pulled the drawer open. Resting inside was a single piece of currency. The item resting inside that drawer was not just a piece of paper. It was the physical manifestation of his disdain. It was the exact price tag he had placed on my life, on my comfort, and on the survival of our premature son. He thought $100 was sufficient compensation for abandoning me in a blizzard while I bled. He thought his wealth insulated him from the consequences of his cruelty. I picked up the $100 bill. The paper was still wrinkled creased from the moment he had tossed it onto my blood-soaked mattress. I smoothed the edges with my thumb, feeling the rough texture of the ink. I swung my legs over the side of the hospital bed, planting my bare feet firmly on the cold floor. Carmen stepped forward, offering a steadying hand, but I shook my head. I did not need assistance. The pain in my abdomen was entirely muted by the soaring triumph flooding my veins. I walked slowly across the room, stopping inches away from the man who was currently restrained by federal law enforcement. The two agents stepped back slightly, allowing me a moment of uninterrupted proximity, perhaps sensing the profound weight of the interaction about to unfold. Nathan looked up at me, a glimmer of desperate hope flashing in his tear-filled eyes. He thought I was coming to intervene, to beg the agents for leniency, to fulfill the societal expectation that a wife must always protect her husband, no matter the cost. He expected the quiet, obedient supply chain director to clean up his mess one last time. He leaned forward, waiting for his salvation, his breath hitching in his throat. Instead, I reached out and grabbed the lapel of his tailored charcoal suit. I pulled him a fraction of an inch closer, holding his gaze hostage. I folded the crumpled bill in half, then in half again, creating a small, neat square. With deliberate, unhurried precision, I slid the folded cash directly into his expensive breast pocket, right next to his silk handkerchief. I let go of his jacket, smoothing the fabric with a final dismissive pat. I looked him dead in his panicked, tear-streaked eyes and echoed the exact words he had spoken to me during the darkest, most terrifying night of my life. "Take an Uber to prison, Nathan," I said, my voice cold, steady, and echoing with undeniable finality. "I need my sleep." The federal agents did not offer him a moment to respond. They gripped his arms firmly, turning him toward the open doorway. I stood in the center of the room, watching as they marched him down the bright hospital corridor, his pathetic, sobbing pleas fading into the distance. The heavy wooden doors swung shut behind them, sealing the exit. The chaotic storm he had brought into my life was finally, unequivocally over, leaving behind a beautiful, untouched silence. The heavy wooden doors of the maternity ward swung shut, swallowing the frantic pleas of my husband as federal agents marched him down the corridor. The profound silence that followed was not empty. It was saturated with a deep, resonating finality. The chaotic storm Nathan had violently introduced into my life was unequivocally over, leaving behind a pristine, untouched quiet. I stood in the center of the recovery room, barefoot on the cold linoleum, feeling the weight of the last 4 years finally lift from my shoulders. Carmen wrapped her arms tightly around me, holding me in a fierce, protective embrace, while Valerie quietly gathered her legal documents, respecting the magnitude of the moment. 6 months have passed since that spectacular winter morning. The brutal Michigan blizzard melted away, replaced by the bright, vibrant promise of a Midwestern spring, which eventually settled into the warm, golden hues of early autumn. I am no longer confined to a hospital bed, tethered to medical monitors and fighting for survival. I am standing on the sprawling wooden deck of my beautiful lake house, the morning sun reflecting brilliantly off the calm, clear water. This is the exact same property Nathan tried to illegally evict me from. After my private holding company, Apex Financial Solutions, formally foreclosed on his defaulted secondary loan, I stripped his name completely off the deed. The house is entirely mine. I spent the summer remodeling the interior, knocking down the dark, oppressive walls he favored to let the natural light pour in. It is no longer a prison disguised as a marital home. It is a sanctuary, filled with warmth, laughter, and the joyful sounds of a thriving family. My son Mateo is healthy, strong, and growing faster than I can comprehend. He spent 3 terrifying weeks in the neonatal intensive care unit, fighting for every breath. But he inherited the resilience necessary to survive in this world. Right now, he is sitting on a soft blanket in the center of the living room floor, giggling as my sister Carmen helps him stack brightly colored wooden blocks. Dave, my brother-in-law, is in the kitchen, expertly flipping pancakes on the stove, the rich smell of cinnamon and coffee drifting through the open windows. The legal and corporate fallout from my forensic audit moved through the justice system with terrifying, absolute efficiency. The comprehensive 60-page digital dossier I compiled left Nathan absolutely zero room to maneuver. His high-priced criminal defense attorneys attempted to negotiate a favorable plea bargain, but the federal prosecutors, armed with the encrypted master ledgers provided by his mistress, refused to entertain any leniency. Nathan was found guilty on multiple federal charges, including massive corporate embezzlement, sophisticated interstate wire fraud, and severe financial tampering. The federal judge, notorious for handing down maximum sentences in white-collar crime cases, did not mince words during the sentencing hearing. He characterized Nathan as a manipulative, predatory parasite who utilized his corporate position and his marriage to orchestrate systemic theft. Nathan is currently wearing a standard-issue orange jumpsuit, serving a lengthy sentence in a federal penitentiary located hundreds of miles away. He is permanently stripped of his luxury lifestyle, his tailored suits, and the executive authority he believed made him a king. His mother, Shirley, suffered an equally devastating fall from grace. The financial investigation into Nathan's offshore shell companies inevitably exposed Shirley's own questionable tax practices. The Internal Revenue Service aggressively audited her entire financial history, seized the majority of her assets, and forced her to liquidate her remaining properties to satisfy massive tax debts. The wealthy, elitist socialite who once ruthlessly mocked my working-class background was forced to abandon her sprawling estate in Bloomfield Hills. She is currently renting a tiny, dilapidated apartment on the outskirts of the city, working as a receptionist at a local real estate office just to make ends meet. Taylor, the junior accounts manager who thought she could fund a tropical fantasy by framing me for postpartum psychosis, avoided federal prison only because she fully cooperated with the investigation and turned state's evidence. She received 5 years of strict probation, hundreds of hours of mandatory community service, and a permanent ban from working in the financial or corporate sales sector ever again. She lost her downtown apartment and relocated back to her hometown. Her career in logistics entirely obliterated. I did not just survive their cruelty. I thrived in the aftermath. The exposure of Nathan's massive corporate fraud sent shockwaves through the regional supply chain industry, but it also highlighted the supreme competence required to uncover such a sophisticated scheme. The executives at his former logistics firm were thoroughly impressed by the meticulous precision of my forensic audit. However, I did not accept a position with them. Instead, a rival international shipping conglomerate, desperate to overhaul their internal security protocols, approached me with an offer I could not refuse. I am no longer the quiet supply chain director Nathan dismissed as a glorified box counter. I am now the vice president of global supply chain operations, commanding respect from the top logistical institutions in the country. I dictate transit tariffs, manage multi-billion-dollar freight corridors, and ensure the integrity of international shipping lanes. The salary and executive bonuses afford me a life of profound security, ensuring Mateo will never want for anything. I take a slow sip of my coffee, savoring the rich flavor and the undeniable taste of absolute justice. I look out over the calm surface of the lake, reflecting on the long, chaotic journey that brought me to this exact moment. Society constantly conditions women to be the bigger person. We are taught to endure disrespect quietly to keep the peace at all costs, and to walk away from abuse with our heads held high while the abusers face zero consequences. We are told that passive forgiveness is the only path to true healing. We are expected to swallow the pain, pack our bags, and start over while the toxic manipulators move on to their next victim without missing a step. But standing on the deck of my beautiful home, completely free of the people who tried to ruin my life, I realize that narrative is a lie designed to protect the guilty. True peace does not come from quietly enduring abuse. True peace comes from holding abusers absolutely accountable with cold, surgical precision. It comes from gathering your data, building your case, and striking back with such undeniable force that they can never hurt you or anyone you love ever again. Nathan thought my value was perfectly encapsulated in a crumpled $100 bill. He thought I was small, insignificant, and easily discarded. He believed my intelligence was limited to mundane administrative chores. But he learned the hard way that when you push a woman who knows exactly how to calculate the true cost of betrayal, you will ultimately pay with your entire life. I turn back toward the house, walking inside to join my family. I sit down on the floor next to Mateo, wrapping my arms around him and burying my face in his soft hair. He lets out a joyful squeal, grabbing my finger with his tiny hand. I look up at Carmen and Dave, feeling an overwhelming wave of gratitude for the people who stood beside me when the storm raged the hardest. If you have ever been pushed to your absolute breaking point by someone who underestimated your strength, let me know how you fought back in the comments below. Hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about surviving betrayal and claiming the ultimate victory. Remember that you do not have to endure cruelty to be a good person. Sometimes the most righteous thing you can do is hand the bully their own bill and force them to pay it in full. Thank you for watching, and may you always find the courage to protect your peace. There is a pervasive, almost sacred myth woven into the fabric of American culture regarding the traditional family. We are taught from a very young age to revere the idyllic portrait of the nuclear household. The sprawling suburban home with a manicured lawn, the successful husband climbing the corporate ladder, the devoted mother, and the children sleeping safely in their beds. We are told that preserving this structure is the ultimate goal of adulthood, and that maintaining the peace within those four walls is a parent's highest moral obligation. But what happens when the foundation of that beautiful house is steeped in deceit? What is a mother's true responsibility when the man standing at the head of the table is not a protector, but a predator, disguised in a tailored suit? The story of Loretta and Nathan strips away the glossy veneer of the American dream to reveal a profound and unsettling truth about family loyalty and the fierce requirements of parenthood. When a pregnant woman is abandoned in the middle of a blinding Midwestern blizzard, handed a crumpled $100 bill by a husband who values his regional sales pitch more than the lives of his wife and unborn son, a fundamental covenant is broken. In that freezing, solitary drive to the hospital, Loretta was not just fighting for her own survival. She was enduring the brutal crucible of motherhood, stepping into a role that demands infinitely more than just providing food and shelter. Parenting, at its absolute core, is about establishing the moral architecture of a child's universe. Long-term guidance does not merely consist of helping a child with their homework or teaching them how to throw a baseball. It requires modeling honesty, enforcing fairness, and demonstrating a high degree of emotional awareness. Children are incredibly perceptive. They do not learn how to navigate the world by listening to what we say, but by watching what we tolerate. Had Loretta chosen the path of least resistance, had she accepted the infidelity, the financial abuse, and the suffocating narcissism just to maintain the illusion of an intact family for her son Mateo, she would have taught him the most damaging lesson of all. She would have taught him that betrayal is acceptable, that a woman's worth is negotiable, and that power equates to immunity. Instead, Loretta redefined what it means to protect a family. She understood that a toxic presence, no matter how much societal prestige it carries, is a cancer to a child's emotional development. A traditional family structure is fundamentally worthless if it lacks the essential pillars of integrity and accountability. By utilizing her brilliant professional intellect to systematically dismantle Nathan's corporate fraud, freeze his stolen assets, and expose his legal treachery, she was performing the most profound act of maternal love imaginable. She was sanitizing her son's environment. She was ensuring that Mateo would grow up surrounded only by the fierce, unwavering loyalty of his mother, his Aunt Carmen, and his Uncle Dave, a chosen extended family that embodied the true, enduring values of the American community. This brings us to a highly uncomfortable, counter-conventional truth that society desperately tries to ignore. For generations, cultural expectations have placed the burden of emotional endurance squarely on the shoulders of mothers. Women are routinely conditioned to be the bigger person, to compromise, to swallow their pride, and to quietly forgive unforgivable transgressions for the sake of the children. We are sold the lie that passive endurance is a virtue, and that righteous anger is somehow damaging to a household. But enduring abuse is not a virtue. It is a surrender. There is a profound philosophical fallacy in the idea that a mother must sacrifice her own dignity to preserve the peace. True peace can never exist in the shadow of exploitation. Sometimes, the most deeply moral protective action a parent can take is to burn a corrupted structure entirely to the ground so that something healthy can be built from the ashes. Loretta did not seek revenge. She sought equilibrium. She demonstrated that teaching a child about fairness sometimes requires handing a bully the exact, devastating invoice for their cruelty. Mateo will not grow up watching his mother shrink to accommodate an arrogant man's ego. He will grow up knowing that actions carry inescapable consequences. He will learn emotional awareness by observing a mother who recognized her own worth and refused to let anyone diminish it. He will understand that honesty is not just a polite suggestion, but a rigid requirement for a seat at the family table. By severing the toxic anchor Loretta gave her son the ultimate gift, a clear, unobstructed horizon where the definition of manhood is not warped by entitlement and greed, but defined by accountability and respect. Stories like this resonate so deeply because they hold a mirror up to the silent compromises we all make in our daily lives. They challenge us to evaluate the price we are paying for our own versions of peace. Are we building our families on a foundation of genuine truth, or are we simply maintaining an exhausted facade to appease the expectations of the world around us? If Loretta's journey through the blizzard and her triumphant reclamation of her life stirred something within you, if you find yourself nodding at the justice of a ledger finally balanced, then you belong here, with us. Please follow Emily Told Stories and join our community of listeners who appreciate the raw, unfiltered realities of resilience, betrayal, and ultimate vindication. We share these narratives because they remind us of the strength we often forget we possess. Ultimately, the measure of our lives is not found in the titles we hold, the neighborhoods we live in, or the glossy holiday cards we mail to our acquaintances. It is found in the quiet, decisive moments when we choose not to look away from the ugly truth. It is found in the courage it takes to look at the people who have harmed us, to look at the structures that have failed us, and to refuse to be complicit in our own destruction. Perhaps the most unsettling reflection to take away from this story is the realization that the greatest threats to our families rarely come from strangers in the dark. They often sleep right beside us, hidden beneath the warm, familiar covers of our own complacency. True safety is not a locked door. It is the terrifying, liberating willingness to recognize when the danger is already inside the house and possessing the unwavering conviction to cast it out into the cold.